Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 154 of the news. And thanks for sticking with us through that small little hiccup we had just a moment ago.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on the past 24 hours of news, and we're not really sure what exactly has caused the outage right now. It may be anything from a DDoS attack to some kind of a server issue, but I'm pretty sure it was some kind of an attack on whatever I'm using, because Matthew's connection somehow was perfectly fine. Everything on my end went down, and I even tried to call Matthew on my phone, and every single time it went straight to voicemail, and he doesn't even have a record that I called his phone. So I'm thinking that it was something that was directed at me. I don't really know a lot about that. I don't know how it would extend over to the phone, but that's kind of weird. And just in case, I'm actually going to call Matthew real quick on stream, just so that way we can see if it does go right back to voicemail. So let me check that real quick.
And guess what? It's coming through.
All right, and and Matthew was just saying before we came on stream, I said, well, I couldn't even call you either. He said, no, that's most likely not what it was. But now everything's working all again at the same time. I don't know. Apparently, somehow my phone was also affected by what happened, which is weird. And I've never seen anything like that. But anyways, stream's going to go on. And hopefully someone will pay for what they just did to our stream. But anyways, welcome back to day 154. We're going to be reporting the past 24 hours of news. And I think we may be getting the ire and the hatred of a lot of Russians. Because as the title suggests and the thumbnail, Russian losses have piled high. And today it has become official, according to the official losses count, that the Russians have now surpassed 40,000 soldiers who have decided to take a nap and never wake up again. We'll of course be covering that later on in our Location Unknown news, but we also have extraordinary news coming from the Kherson front showing that there is a decent amount of activity there and a decent amount of progress. Now, if I could ask y'all something before we move on into tonight's schedule, please make sure to hit the like button and let everyone know that the stream is live and it is running. Also, I just saw someone saying solar flare. Well, I'm fairly confident, everyone, that was something directed right at me, because Matthew, just about 10 feet away, is perfectly fine, and he was perfectly fine during the whole thing. But anyways, if y'all could hit the like button, it's going to help a lot of our channel subscribers know that the stream is live. It's going to promote it to them again, and it's going to promote it to a lot of people out there across the entire internet that's never heard of this stream, so that way they can know that we're reporting the news every single day, and regardless of what happens to these streams, we're going to keep them running. And so with that, let's get into tonight's schedule. We're going to be starting off, of course, in the Kherson area. After we cover the Kherson news, we're then going to be moving into, let me make sure, it is... All right, so I apparently did not include that piece of news. I was just making sure. So we're actually going to be moving from the Kherson area to the Voronezh region and covering the news there as well. After that, we'll then move into the Sumi region and cover a bit of news that is incredibly old, but it does show the legacy of a pretty famous and well-known brigade here on this channel that's been doing a lot of work near the Balaklia area. And after we cover that news, we'll then be moving on down to the Location Unknowns and covering those as well, which we have a very small amount of today. After we cover that segment of news, we'll then be moving into the Kharkiv and Lysychansk area. But of course, before we get there, we're going to take another pause, a first pause, to answer 3 questions from the chat. And after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then move on into the Kharkiv and Lysychansk area and cover the news there as well. After we cover all of the Kharkiv and Luhansk news, we're then going to move down into the Popasna and, I believe, Vlodimirivka area and cover that news as well in the same segment. We'll then start moving down towards the Orlivka area, but we'll take a pause before we get there and answer another 3 questions from the chat. And after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then move into the Donetsk news. We'll also move into the Southern Front news, the very small amount of it we have, just about 1 bit. And then we will be moving out of Ukraine into Switzerland. Now, a lot of y'all may be wondering, what in the world does Switzerland have to do with the war? And we're going to get to that, and it's honestly pretty shocking and crazy news, especially for Switzerland. And after that, we're then going to be visiting our favorite, the good old US of A, to be talking about what the United States has been doing for Ukraine over the past day. So, of course, we have a lot of news to cover, and I'm looking forward to covering all of it. And just in case, for those of y'all to know, if our stream for some reason has another outage tonight, which we cannot explain, please make sure to just sit by for a couple of minutes, and we'll have another one up immediately afterwards. Whenever we go down and we come back on, and about 500 to 1,000 people do not get back on the stream, it is letting these DDoS attackers, if that is the case, it lets them know that they are winning and that they can actually stop people from listening to the news. And so if you want to let them know that they can't win, make sure to always hop back on once the stream goes down, because we're always going to be bringing up another, unless if we say otherwise on the community page on the YouTube channel, or if we say otherwise on the Discord server as well. You can find notifications about the stream on both of those. But nonetheless, we're now going to move into the Kherson front, where we've heard some pretty interesting news today, and although I haven't had a news bulletin for it, we have gotten confirmation from, apparently multiple sources on the ground that multiple spans of the Antonovskiy bridge have been destroyed, and the bridge has been taken out of action completely. Apparently, the Russians are trying to create a ferry to ferry troops and supplies across the river, but as y'all all know, the reason why bridges came to be is because ferries are incredibly inefficient and cannot transport a massive amount of supplies over a long period of time. And so with the bridge being knocked out, even with this ferry, if it does exist, which we really know nothing about yet, rather than the idea that it may exist, the Russians in Kherson are in a pretty bad situation. And I cannot wait to see what the Ukrainians are going to do to them, because at this point, it almost appears to be inevitable that the Russians are on the losing end of the war down here in the Kherson area. Now, this has also been met because, of course, I've had the unfortunate occasion today, and please do forgive me, because while I am the enforcer, every once in a while I do walk by a TV running in our house and there's some kind of news on somewhere. And I actually noticed two big things that I'd actually like to talk about here on stream. The first one is that, of course, Western news, the mainstream media, it's not really Western, it's really just the mainstream news, they are saying that the Russians are pulling forces from all around the country. This kind of sounds similar to something else we've heard before, and they're now going to move all of their forces into the Kherson area, and once they get there, they're going to steamroll the Ukrainians and push them back and win the war. How many times have we all heard that? How many people would like to take a guess how many times I've sat here over 154 days and heard that exact same line said over and over and over about different occasions, and it never came to be? We heard this about Kyiv, we heard this about the 40-mile-long convoy, we heard this around the encirclement of Kharkiv, we heard this when the whole entire northern front collapsed and the Russians supposedly were moving all of their forces into the southeast for a giant push that would win the war. We heard that about when they were going to take Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. They were just going to steamroll their way through the Donbass and take it in a few weeks. And through all of those, every single one of those estimates was wrong. And now we're here again, listening to the news say the same story, at least the mainstream news, and they're telling us the Russians are going to be moving forces into the Kherson area, and now they're just going to magically win. But one thing I never heard them address, and of course the news doesn't really focus on facts or logic anymore, is even if the Russians were to put a whole lot of extra forces in this Kherson area and pocket, how in the world are they going to supply them? They can't even supply the forces that are there anymore, specifically within Kherson City. So what's 20,000 extra troops, say, as a random number, is going to do to fix that situation? It's going to do nothing. In fact, it's going to make it worse. And so I'm not really sure about that. I don't really believe it. And if the Russians are doing something like that again, that's pretty stupid on their part, and they're just setting up soldiers for the slaughter. Anyways, we're now going to be moving to actual frontline news near the city of Kherson, where we saw a Ukrainian Mi-24 firing off unguided rockets somewhere in the direction of the city, most likely towards Russian forces. And so, without further ado, here's the video. See the helicopter flying low across the ground, and you can also see that it's flying over massive fields of wheat that have almost been completely burned out. Sure, there's some left, but for the most part, a lot of the wheat's been burned. We now see the helicopter lifting up and firing off its flares and its rockets as well, and then hitting the ground and trying to get away as fast as possible. I do not even have to tell y'all about the bravery of Ukrainian helicopter pilots, because these exact same Mi-24s that the Ukrainians are using in this video were the helicopters that flew to the city of Belgorod and attacked an oil refinery in the middle of the dawn, of the break of dawn, and were able to do it in front of everyone in Belgorod and flew back out without taking a single loss that the Russians could confirm. And so with that, it is impressive to see that these Ukrainian Mi-24s are still flying and still fighting that good fight for Ukraine with their I guess you could say their valor and their bravery that they have exhibited throughout the entirety of the war, and we can still see them exhibiting that same bravery and courage here in this part of the war. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of location unknown news, where we can then see further up the line that a Russian soldier is saying that he's not exactly having a good time. Now, if y'all would like to know exactly what he's saying, apparently there's a translation down here, and I'll read this to y'all before we watch the video. So, the interviewer says, recently, Ukrainian authorities have been actively dispersing the topic of an allegedly preparing counteroffensive in the Kherson direction. And here we are in the direction of Kherson, on the very front line of defense of one of the divisions of the Russian Federation. Now we will talk with the fighters. We will understand how these loud statements correspond to reality. Then a Russian soldier said, all right, when they go, still closer than walking to them, the closer we get, the more we'll kill. So they have no chance, no options at all. What can you say about your soldiers? As I understand it, Russian soldier interrupts him. Russian soldier, they are true heroes. And then that's the end of it. But one thing that we're about to get here is that these Russians are not having a good time. And as the videos come out from the rest of the front lines today, we're about to see that that's not really the case.
Время власти Украины активно разгоняет тему якобы готовящегося контрнаступления на Херсонском направлении. И вот мы здесь, на Херсонском направлении, на самом переднем крае обороны одного из подразделений вооруженных сил Российской Федерации. Сейчас пообщаемся с бойцами, поймем, насколько соответствуют реальности эти громкие заявления.
Хорошо, когда к нам пойдут, то все ближе, чем к ним ходить. Чем ближе придут, тем больше побьет.
То есть шансов у них никаких нет?
Вообще без вариантов.
Ну что можете сказать о своих бойцах? Я так понимаю...
Это Рекс, это герои на сегодняшний день.
Чем ближе подойдут...
And here's all of their gear. Just a little while later, and the Ukrainians have not only captured the soldiers, but are displaying the gear that they've taken off of them as well. Not really a good look for these quote-unquote brave Russian soldiers, is it? You can see right there one of the stars of the Russian army on a pack. And we can even see, what in the world was that? Cigarettes. We can also see some passports of the Russians and some coins as well. All captured by the Ukrainians from the exact same soldiers that were in that film. Not really the brave, valiant soldiers we saw of last week. Now they appear to be prisoners of war. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of location, well, from Kherson news in the area, where we've seen the 14th Mechanized Brigade hitting Russian positions with their artillery. Of course, I'll have to mute that real quick, but we can see the artillery slamming down to the Russian positions and some white smoke billowing up. We can't really tell from the grainy footage right there if a vehicle was destroyed, but based off of that explosion, now we have a pretty good idea that a vehicle did go up in flames. Insurance will not cover that. Insurance covers acts of God, just for y'all to know, and while Ukrainian artillery and its accuracy would be considered, I guess you could say, a feat of biblical proportions, I guess the best way to say it. Sadly, insurance does not count that as an act of God. We're now going to be moving on to the next bit of Kherson news, where we've also seen Ukrainian crabs in action. Now, we've always heard about the Ukrainians and their crabs. They got them somewhere in the middle of the war. We don't know who they were messing with. Some people say the Polish, but still, somehow they did get crabs. However, we can see that they're trying to spread the crabs to the Russians as well. Kind of a sick thing to do, but here's the video of the Ukrainians and their crabs and them spreading it to other countries.
Краб Польща прийняла на озброєння 2008 року. Але саме зараз, тут, в Україні, вони проходять бойове хрещення, знищуючи російських загарбників.
Перші краби до України надійшли в червні. Наші військові одразу оцінили далекобійність та влучність нових гаубиць. Зброя 21-го сторіччя дозволяє швидше нищити ворога.
З отриманням даного комплексу вийшли на новий рівень. І командирське машинне управління гармат оснащені сучасними засобами. Є GPS-навігатор, є комп'ютер, на який зав'язується даний комплекс. Ми не використовуємо бусоль, так як у старіших модифікаціях.
Наші артилеристи, які отримують озброєння країн НАТО, успішно нищили ворога навіть зі старих систем. З ручним заряджанням та без комп'ютерів. А нова зброя дозволяє сьогодні працювати більш ефективно.
Приходять сюди на комп'ютер, ми заходимо тут, к примеру, вогневе завдання, цілі. Ми міряємо температуру, вона автоматично вбивається в комп'ютер і сама все вираховує. Заряджаємо, моє діло тільки нажати кнопку постріл.
Наші гармаші отримали координати цілі.
I don't know why everyone does it, because I've noticed this about every single reporter everywhere, is that they always want to make sure that they get the sound of the artillery firing in their, I guess you could say, their monologue. And I don't know why, because it never comes off well for anyone. Artillery is incredibly loud. And if you haven't been around it and gotten deaf from it yet, it's going to make you jump. And everyone I've ever seen jumps, especially when the larger calibers, like a 155 millimeter, fires and they're trying to report near it. And we could see this Ukrainian reporter, of course, kind of falling victim to the massive, loud, raucous noise that this gun makes.
Нажати кнопку постріл.
Наші гармаші отримали координати цілі. Сучасна апаратура зробила прив'язку до місцевості.
Now I gotta say though, his recovery was really good, because if this was Patrick Lancaster, he would have been sitting there, I'm near the Russian, and it had blown up, and then he would just have lost it and pretty much said nothing. But this guy, although it definitely rung his ears pretty bad, he continued on with what he was trying to say, and I gotta give him credit that while he was a little bit thrown off by the sound, he got through it pretty okay. And so huge kudos to, of course, him and the Crab's crew that's working in the background.
Та наведення. Отже, снаряди летять не кудись туди, а прямо по позиціям ворога.
Зазвичай артилеристи-гаубічники не бачать результатів своєї роботи, проте вони впевнені у надійності своєї зброї.
Нам ми сильно і не питаємо, але коли кажуть, що попали, це дуже приємно і дає натхнення хлопцям, і якось піднімається настрій, дух працювати далі.
Подібні системи розробки країн НАТО, і не тільки польські краби, працюють по всьому фронту. Вони не дають ворогу жодного шансу.
That's the end of the video, but it's nice to see that those Polish crabs, of course, handed over to the Ukrainians a little bit ago, are in operation, and it looks like the Ukrainians are having a pretty good time with them. Now, I do have to say that out of all the artillery systems we've seen, and of course this is just my layman perspective and my personal preference, I think the Panzerhaubitze 2000, out of all of them, I don't know if you agree with me, Matthew, but I think that the Panzerhaubitze 2000 is a little bit better than the Crab, just for the sole reason that the turret crew has like an apartment that they're walking around in. So I bet you, ergonomics-wise, the crew is a lot happier with being in the spacious Panzerhaubitze. But what do you think, Matthew?
Probably so, and it's also German-made, so you know it must be made pretty well.
Well, if BMW's record has anything to say about that, probably not. But still, I mean, like, that's a pretty good point. Usually the Germans are known for quality, and I would have to agree that it's probably a quality-made tank. Of course, everyone also holds the Leopard 2s in high regard as well, although we've seen a lot of them destroyed in Turkey, but we'll get to that another time, maybe in a video. But still, pretty nice to see the crabs in operation. And what do y'all think? If you could, Matthew, throw up a poll here in a bit, asking people, what do they think is better, the M109, the Panzerhaubitze 2000? Well, actually, this is going to be too much to laundry list off of. So if we want to address the current poll, we'll open up a new one talking about this question here.
Okay, so addressing the current poll, the question is, should we also cover Taiwan along with the Ukraine war on stream? It looks like 42% of you said yes, I want to know about it. 51% of you said only if the situation escalates, and 6% said no, I am not interested at all. So, very interesting results. I can kind of agree with the 51%. However, it seems like things are heating up just a little bit over there in Taiwan, especially between the United States and China. So it might be good to go ahead and start covering it, maybe. What are your thoughts, Enforcer?
I think we may want to start covering it. This is something interesting to me, because I was thinking, as this war continues to go on, we're seeing that things are occurring all around the world that are incredibly important and, of course, require coverage. Is this going to go into, and I'm not saying this is going to be an instant evolution here or anything. It's most likely going to occur over a long period of time, like the next 150 days. But are we going to start including news from all over the world in this Ukraine war stream? And is it going to become nightly news? I don't know if we're going to be doing that. I still think that Ukraine is what we're of course, originally talking about, what we should continue to talk about. But considering that Taiwan appears to be heating up, especially with the activities that have occurred today, we have also been knocking around whether we should start covering that as well. So if y'all think we should, do let us know. I saw that a lot of people said only if it escalates, and so we kind of got an answer there. But with that, we're now going to run a new poll before we move on to the next bit of news. And here's the question, Matthew. What do you think is a better SPG? And then after you type that up, let me know when. I'll give you the options.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so a Crab, spelled Krab, M109, Panzerhaubitze 2000, just spell that as PZH 2000. Or
I actually know how to spell Panzerhaubitze, just so you know.
yeah, I didn't know if you were able to fit it in though. And let's see, what is one more that we can throw in? We'll throw in the Russian one, the Mista S, which is MSTA-S, all caps. And once you get that done, throw that in, and we will let that poll run for a bit, and then we'll be moving on into the next bit of news here from the war. And I see some people actually saying that they would like to have nightly global news, which is interesting to me, and I'm not sure how we'd be able to pull that off, but as time goes by, we may think about that. So with that, we're now moving out of this bit of news and on to the next, which is of course going to be outside the Kherson region, but as y'all can see today from the video evidence, the Ukrainians are pushing them back. Due to the media blackout, we don't get an exact idea as to how this is going. The Ukrainians aren't allowing a lot of video footage out from the soldiers on the ground, well, really any at all, and so we have no idea what the situation is actually developing like on the ground. We do know that the Ukrainians were able to take Vyskopilya. The Russians there, from what we were able to finally figure out, were not surrounded, but they were getting threatened with encirclement by a pincer maneuver that the Ukrainians were pulling off on the east and west of the village, and so the Russians decided that the best thing for them to do was to withdraw, and so they've now pulled out to the town of Novopetrivka, and the Ukrainians have captured Vyskopilya. So we do see that the Ukrainians are making ground, at least from the official reports we were finally able to get. But beyond that, we don't have a really good picture of what's going on here just due to the media blackouts. But still, it's great to see that the Ukrainians are going to be eventually making ground here and that they are definitely hitting the points that count, like the Antonovskiy Bridge. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Mykolaiv area, and we're now going to be moving all the way into Russia, where we can actually see that some Russian soldiers are going home. That's right, the Russians actually care about their soldiers. And in fact, these are Tuvans, and they're going to be sent back to Tanituva because the Russians care about all of their citizens. It seems, though, that an odd thing occurred where all of these soldiers have been put in boxes, and they're being transported home inside of boxes. Hundreds of them. Now, is that like the Russians or what? If this was an American soldier, they would have put them in a coffin and sent them home. Or they would have put them in something close to a coffin. The Russians literally made just normal wooden boxes, not even in the shape of a coffin. These could just be used to pack anything, in ammo, food, whatever you'd like. And they just used them to dump the dead bodies in. And now they're shipping them back to Tanituva, so that way the families there can be told that your son was a patriot. Here's some Lada money. And go get yourself a white Lada. It seems like they're inside of an IL-76. Can't really tell you for certain. It sounds and looks like one. It's definitely not a railroad car. But God, I mean, it's really hard to even get a metric of how many dead bodies is inside of this single plane in these wooden boxes being sent back to Tuva. I would say over 100 at least. That's the best estimate I could give y'all. And it just gives you an idea of how little the Russians are getting out of this. And how many lives they're having to expend. And most of these Tuvans are from one of the poorest areas of the country. And in fact, they're not even what you would think of as a Russian. They're more Mongolian or Central Asian than anything. And the Russians have been using these people as the bulwark of their force inside of Ukraine, sending out these, I guess you could say, minorities from Russia into Ukraine to fight for them. And I actually delved into something the other day, looked at it, and went over some statistics, and I found out that the Russians even have a different argument, which we won't go into on stream due to community guidelines issues, but once you look into the statistics, it wasn't true. Now, another thing I would like to point out is that y'all may have seen that there was a little NASA tab that has been open up here near my map the entire night. And I'm going to show y'all something that I found really interesting today, and a lot of people have recommended I show this on stream, and while I have looked at it off stream, I'm going to show it to y'all for the first time on stream. This is the NASA FIRMS map. This map tracks every single fire that's been visible from satellite across the entire world over any given amount of time. You can adjust this to just 3 or 4 days ago, where you can see all the fires that have been ongoing in the world over the past 4 days, and you can adjust it all the way back to 31 days ago, an entire month. Now, what can we get from this? Well, we can get for the first thing that the Italians apparently are having a little bit of a roasty season. But the other important thing that we can get from this is what we can see inside of Ukraine. You see, artillery always creates fires, and also the wheat fields that are of course ignited by the Russian incendiaries also give off a decent amount of heat and of course fire signatures as well, which these satellites then pick up and then report as these little dots on the map. And what we can see here is a very interesting picture about how exactly these front lines have developed over the past 31 days, and it gives you an idea here in this picture how stagnant the front lines have actually been. You can literally see where the front lines are by the outline of the heavy red dots all across the front, where this front has been for literally an entire month. And over the course of the past 31 days, there's been so little movement that the front lines are literally outlined in the fire heat signatures that have been picked up from this satellite. We can see here towns such as Zaporizhia, just north. We can actually see that my front line, based off of the fire images, is a little bit off. Apparently, the front line down here in the southern front is a little bit more north, more towards Stepnogorsk than anything. But of course, we don't have any video evidence to confirm that. But based off of this, we may start to change the front lines. We can see continue all the way over to Donetsk, and we can see that the Russians, by and large, have been bombarding the areas behind the lines. And so this even gives you a better idea, based off of the precedent that's been set in the Donetsk region, is that the Russians don't control anything beyond the airport, right here. And so most of these fires over the past month have been caused by Russian artillery bombardments. And so what does this tell us? This tells us that the Ukrainian front line is not, in fact, in the center or at the very edge of the top of this giant, I guess you could say, red field. It's more closer to the bottom. And so when you put it into perspective there, the Russians have not made any ground at all over the past month. In fact, nothing. Like, the front lines here, we can find Bakhmut. Here's Bakhmut. The Ukrainians are about right here at this point. And also up here near Lysychansk, they're about right here. And it's insane. The Russians have literally made almost no ground over the past month. And you can see this clearly on a heat signature map. Now, this is the first time. This is actually a first on our channel, just in case if you're new. We've never shown anyone else's map on stream, but I'm showing this one because, of course, NASA doesn't have any reason to lie. This is, of course, used to show other things around the world. For example, all of the fires that occur inside the United States. And if you look at the map here, we actually have more fires going on in the United States than in Ukraine from Russian artillery bombardments, at least from this view in space. It also appears that a lot of them have been happening in Alabama. Jeez, that's actually a lot of fires. Anyways, it's still an interesting thing to note, specifically about Ukraine, and it's showing a pretty interesting story that you couldn't really get otherwise, and a very interesting way to look at this war. Now, another thing I'd like for y'all to notice is this one area up here near Chuhuiv. Y'all may have noticed that there is absolutely no fires, well, very few of them happening in this area, even south of the reservoir, and we've been noting that over the entirety of the war, and we have absolutely no idea why that's the case. This area right here is completely silent. Both sides don't really commit any activity here, and there's no reason not to. It's wide open ground, yet neither side is capitalized on it, and I'm wondering why. We'll eventually find out, probably well after this war ends, but it's still an interesting anomaly for sure. And you can also see how quiet the Kharkiv area is compared to the rest of the country due to how sporadic and less densely populated the red dots are in that area. But anyways, now that I've talked about this map, we're going to close it out because that's the only time I'm going to show it tonight. But the whole point I was bringing up that map is to talk about these Tuvans. Over the past month, the Russians have made no ground, and hundreds of these Tuvans have died to do nothing. They're not achieving any kind of actual goal. They're not even gaining any ground. And the whole entire point they've died was just nothing. I mean, there's really no way to explain it. They died for nothing. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bits of news outside of Russia, and we're now going to be moving to Sumi. Now, a lot of y'all may know, and of course, y'all would not be amiss to know, that the 93rd Brigade has been building up an image and a name for themselves in the Balaklia area. They are the be-all, end-all whenever a Russian force gets in sight. They destroy almost everything they see, even right now, with this part of the front being largely stagnant. Up here in the Sumi region, within the first days of the war, we saw the 93rd Brigade claim some of its first kills against Russian tanks as they were trying to slowly eke their way towards the city of Sumi. And so here's the video of those cold, snowy, barren fields at the beginning of this war, where the Ukrainian army proved that they were no pushovers and that they were a force to be reckoned with. We can see those Russian tanks moving through these barren fields. We can see that one of them has apparently been hit by something as smoke is billowing off of the second tank in the convoy. Note something else interesting about these tanks. These are both T-80Us. Now, when is the last time we've seen a T-80U? It's been months at this point. You can see one of the crew members of the first tank run back. We can now see the driver hopping out of the rear T-80U and running over here to the side of this T-80. It appears that they had already bailed out of that tank, and you can also see the nightmare that the Russians were dealing with at the start of this war. Once they got off of this packed dirt path heading in between these fields and broke out into the field itself, you can see how muddy and how nasty that ground was at that time. The Rasputitsa was in season, and the Russians didn't expect that they would actually have to do a lot of instances like this where they'd have to break off the roads and move through the fields. And you can see that this tank is visibly struggling, although it's probably putting in all of its power to get through that field, and it can hardly move at all. We can then see the aftermath of that T-80U after it exploded, and a Ukrainian soldier from the 93rd Brigade standing right nearby to claim the destruction of the tank. Pretty neat to see, and it once again reminds us, and a lot of everyone, of how far the Ukrainians have actually come. There was a time when the Russians were inside of Kharkiv city, right on the outskirts of Kyiv, fighting in the streets of Sumi and in Chernihiv, and everyone thought that the war would be over within weeks or days. And here we are, 6 months later, and people still have the audacity to say the Russians are going to shift some of their forces over here, and this one's actually going to help them win the war. At this point, it's just silly, and I just don't even know why people carry on those kinds of fallacies and fantasies. But without further ado, we're now going to move out of the Sumi area, and that blast from the past that bit of news was, and we're now going to move down into our location unknowns and cover those as well. Starting off with our first bit, we've seen that a skiff hit a BMP-2 tonight. We can see the BMP-2 there in the middle of the street. It's just sitting there. And we see the Stugna fly in, and it looks like that was actually a really interesting shot right there. It looks like it didn't hit the... Yeah, it didn't hit the rear infantry compartment. It actually flew over the infantry compartment and into the turret. Based off of that, I would assume that both of those crew members have taken a nap, because of Stugna hitting dead onto that turret most likely would have taken out the crew. As you can see here, no one's bailing out as far as we can see. But that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainians are still knocking out Russian vehicles all over the front lines, and huge credit to the security service of Ukraine, which were the ones to knock out that BMP-2. Don't really know why I was sitting in the middle of the road not moving, but who cares? The Russians, of course, are poorly experienced, and they may have been doing that intentionally for no other reason than to just do it. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of location unknown news, where we can also see the security service of Ukraine destroying a BTR-82. Actually, correction, this is from the Air Assault Forces. I just wanted to get that correct for y'all real quick. But we can see the outline of the BTR-82 right there. The bomblet's now on its way, and it strikes to the left side of the turret on the hull. A disabling hit for sure. The second bomblet is now on its way, and then it slams into the driver's compartment right in front of the turret. Both of those are most likely disabling hits. That's the end of the video, but great to see that the Ukrainian air assault brigades are still out there carrying on activity with the artillery and also the drones like we saw in that video, and of course wreaking destruction onto Russian units. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our third bit of location unknown news, where we can see some incredible craftsmanship. Now, I showed this on my short video today, which surprisingly enough, that for some reason a lot of people didn't want to see this guy's house, but this man is literally living out Minecraft in real life. He has decided to take all of the ammo crates that have been left at the front lines as the Ukrainians have been resupplied, and he's built himself a small house. He's still working on the roof and the door, but what he's done so far has been incredible. And so I'm going to let y'all see the video and let him explain what he's done in his own words.
Я сегодня немножко доработал наш домик. Осталась крыша и дверь, но мебели здесь добавилось. Появилась еще одна раскладная лавка.
A folding bench, a table.
Съемная
They even got an ashtray. This thing's nicer than my car.
пару раскладных табуреток для наряда по кухне. Это наш холодильник, который работает аккумулятора.
He even got a fridge.
Ну, собственно, рабочая поверхность. Как-то так.
Now, that is crazy. I haven't seen anything like that. And that was one of the most insane things I've seen. And that's somewhere near the front lines from what we can tell. And this guy has sat there and taken it upon himself, I'm going to build a house. And he's just decided in the middle of a war, he's going to build himself a small little house. Now, one thing that I thought was the coolest thing in that house was the bench and also the little table that he'd made. Because it had an ashtray on it, and it also looked like the table could fold up. One second, everyone. Let me take a look at something real quick. Okay. Sorry. 1 second, everyone. I'm gonna hop over.
Enforcer, that was supposed to be a slick text.
Yeah, I know, but I had to read it because that one threw me off a little bit. So let me hop over here and share my screen.
Just so everybody knows, I was asking the enforcer to share his screen. I wasn't intending to interrupt, but I ended up interrupting anyway.
It's no big deal. But actually, I'll show it to Matthew real quick because I don't think he saw it live. So if everyone will just forgive us for a moment, I'm going to show this to Matthew because I'm sure he'll have a comment or two on this because this is just raw insanity.
Доработал наш домик. Осталась крыша и дверь, но мебели здесь добавилось. Появилась еще одна раскладная лавка. Съемная пепельница. Пару раскладных табуреток для наряда по кухне. Это наш холодильник, который работает аккумулятора. Ну, собственно, рабочая поверхность.
Honestly, this isn't bad. I feel like this would honestly qualify as like modern architecture in some studio apartment in New York City or Los Angeles. But what do you think about that, Matthew? Because we've never really seen anyone build a house like that on the front.
I actually didn't get to see it because the Discord had a glitch, so I'll have to reserve judgment.
All right. And with that, if we were sharing the screen, somehow it's still not working, but, you know, I guess it is what it is. Sometimes technology fails, but still pretty crazy to see. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the final bit of location unknown news. It's the stuff that everyone's been, of course, waiting for tonight. And so hit the like button, tell your friends to hop on, because we're about to delve into one of the biggest bits of news that we've gotten out of the course of the past few weeks. In fact, it's massive news, big enough for me to make the title and the thumbnail about it. We're about to look over the Russian casualty statistics. According to the Kyiv Independent, which put out this infographic, if it loads. Let's go to the Kyiv Independent. Kyiv Independent. We shall now go down to the Kyiv Independent's Twitter and then scroll through it because for some reason someone deleted that post. I don't know why, but it is what it is, I guess. So we'll scroll and scroll. And here we go. Look at that number right there. It wasn't long ago. It was about a month and a half ago that the Russians had reached 30,000 soldiers that had lost their lives during this war. And we have now surpassed 40,000, and we're already well on our way to 40,100. These kinds of numbers just cannot be sustained by the Russians for long. They've lost, at this point, a quarter. Let me actually do the math on that. Let's be incredibly specific. If they entered the war with 220,000 soldiers, and they've lost 40,070 of them killed, and then we divide that by 220,000, we get a total of 18.2% of the total armed forces that they entered Ukraine with have been straight up killed so far, and most likely around 40 to 50% have been wounded. And so they're either bringing in replacement contract soldiers from around Russia, and they're about to start running out of those as well, or their initial force has never been replenished, and they're starting to run out of men. Of course, they're most likely replacing them, but this kind of loss is massive. In fact, if we were to divide this over the past 154 days, which has been 5 months total, we're currently in the 6th, we take 40,000, divide it by 5. They've been losing 8,000 soldiers a month. And if we were to say the average month is 30 days, let's divide that by 30. They've been losing, on average, 267 soldiers per day that have been straight up killed. And it kind of gives you an idea of how badly this war is going for them. 267 soldiers lost per day. Let's pull this up. How many soldiers did the U.S. lose per day in World War II? How many soldiers died per day in World War II? 220. From 1941 to 1945, the average number of soldiers from the United States that were killed per day in the largest war known to mankind was 220 per day, spanning over multiple theaters and thousands of miles of land, both in the Pacific Islands and in the European theater. Only 220 per day. The Russians are losing nearly 270 per day in this war, which isn't even a world war. It's literally, it's when you actually look at it from a clinical perspective, it is a regional conflict in between the Ukrainians and the Russians, which should not be incurring these kinds of casualties, yet it is. This is a lot like the Finnish Winter War, which if you look at it, like, my God, we'll actually look at that for a second. The Finnish Winter War, and compare the stats of what the Russians were losing in that one. Finnish Winter War. Or the Reds. You could call them the Reds as well. See, we'll go to the Reds. Come on. Load for me. Load for me? Come on, I know you can do it. There we go. You still there, Matthew?
Yes.
All right, just checking. Just keep you on your toes. I'm just playing. Well, let's see here. So we have 425,000 as a conservative estimate of the Russian soldiers that were killed. So let's work that out. Wait, no, I'm sorry. Casualties was 126,000 on a conservative number. And this war lasted over 3 months and a week. So if we take 90 days, 96, no, 90, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 103 days. We take 126,875 and divide that by 103 days. The Russians in the Finnish Winter War, y'all are not going to believe this number. They were losing 1,231 soldiers per day in a 3-month, 1-week war. So this is not actually that bad for the going Russian rate. They've done a lot worse. So for the Russians, this is like a cakewalk for them, even though they're losing the war and they're taking heavy losses. Because in the Finnish Winter War, they were losing 1,231 men a day, or two BTGs worth of manpower every 24 hours over a 3-month, 1-week war with Finland. So the Russians kind of have a precedent of doing this kind of thing and taking massive losses in a war which is regional and shouldn't be incurring these kinds of losses. So, gotta hand it to the Russians. If anyone knows how to throw away able-bodied men and manpower, it would be them, because they've been doing it since the beginning of time, it seems. But with that casualty number right there speaks for itself about how badly this war is going for the Russians. Now, the Russians only lost 1 tank today, according to the Kyiv Independent. They have lost 12 armored personnel carriers, though, and that number is getting very close to 4,000. On top of that, the tanks lost is about to get up to around 2,000 here in the future. We don't know how far away that is, but I remember that we actually celebrated 1,000 tanks lost in the war, and it didn't seem that long ago, and they're already getting up towards the 2,000 mark. And according to some estimates, they may have lost a third to half of their operational tank force at this point. We can see that they've lost another 3 artillery systems, no MLRSs, no anti-aircraft systems, no planes. They lost another helicopter, though. They lost 4 drones, and they lost 12 more supply vehicles, almost bringing that number up to 3,000. So I gotta say, the Russian losses are not looking grand. In fact, this is not a winning war based off of what you would assume in the modern era. So we'll, of course, have to keep an eye on these numbers and see if they continue to climb, because I'm telling you, the Russians just can't keep up these kinds of losses forever. It's not something they can do, and if the Ukrainians are taking far lower amounts of losses, the Ukrainians can keep this war going forever. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on out of the location unknown news and into the Kharkiv area and the northern Donbass. But before we get there, we're going to take a quick pause to answer 3 questions from the chat, and after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then move on into the next bit of news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so up first for the first question segment, we have a whopping $200 donation from Mike Marcel, who says, consider delaying college. You're smarter than any of the professors who know less than you. Build a company. Consider a Patreon account.
Well, thank you so much for the massive support, Mike. And to answer that question, I would not like to delay my college. There's no brakes on this train, and delaying my college is delaying a lot of things. For example, going to law school, going and trying to become a politician, because while you don't have to have a college degree or a law degree to become a politician, it does provide a little bit of extra credibility to who you are, and I would like to make sure to be able to at least have an actual idea of how the law works before I became a politician, so that way when I get there, I'm not just, some random, Joe Blow who just sits there and says stuff like, I think it should be this way, and it really has no basis in fact or how things really work. And, while I've always ranted on so-called professionals and, experts in their field and stuff, I still feel like there is a necessary amount of legal knowledge one should have before becoming a politician, because they will then be dealing with the laws of the nation. And so they ought to have a pretty good idea of how they work, at least on a state level for a state like Alabama or wherever they're from. But still, I thank you so much for the support, Mike. Still, I think it's a high praise of what we're doing here, and I do think it would be interesting to continue this on through college and law school, and maybe even further on. But of course, I have ambitions outside of YouTube, and I want to make sure to keep those in focus while this is going on. But I do thank you so much for the support, and having such high praise of our channel and helping us to keep these lights on and keep it running, because without support like that, it wouldn't be possible to be here right now. And so thank you once again for the massive amount of support, and I gotta say, that is huge. And so thank you once again, and with that, we're on to the next one. But once again, I just want to say thank you for your support.
And next up, we do have our regular decoders who have figured out the Morse code. It's WF2U, who puts in a $10 super chat along with Mark Hodges, who said, Enforcer Matt and the Enforcer, the Morse message today is, the Antonovskiy Bridge has been destroyed. Russian forces are panicking.
That is correct. We do have a winner. Ding, 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 ding. Congratulations. It is, in fact, the message was the Antonovskiy Bridge was destroyed and the Russians are panicking, which they are. And I would have to say it's pretty warranted panic, because now they're in a very bad situation. But congratulations on deciphering that Morse code message. And if we can count on anyone to decipher all of our Morse code messages, it is our Morse code readers. And so thank you once again. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
All right, and next up, we have a $50 super chat from Gary Robbins, who says, I am a lawyer. Have you read IL yet? It is the best description of law school.
IL. I don't think I've read that yet. Have you read that, Matthew?
I haven't, and I wonder if he meant to write one L or IL.
I'm not really sure, but I have not read it yet. But of course, I just do things. I don't really read a lot about it. Like, for example, well, no, that's not really true, because I actually read a lot about history and war, and that's kind of how I got my basis for what I say here, and I always err on the side of historical precedent, so I do read a lot. But with things like college and law school, I never really read much about what college was like, because one thing I learned through school is that when you're in elementary school, the teachers sit there and tell you, oh, when you get to middle school, they're not going to take any of that crap. It's going to be so much harder on you. You get to middle school, it's incredibly easy. You're in middle school, and then all the teachers sit there and say, oh, wait until you get to high school. When you get to high school, it's going to be incredibly difficult. No one's going to let anything slide. You get to high school, it's even easier than middle school. And then you're in high school, and then they sit there, oh, well, if you're going to college, it's not going to be a cakewalk. It's going to be really hard. And by that point, you've heard this speech, kind of like how I hear the speech that the Russians will eventually pull it all together and win the war so many times, that by that point in my life, we're hearing about how college was going to be so difficult, I assumed it was going to be a cakewalk. And while it has been a little bit difficult at times, I have had an incredibly difficult class, I believe once or twice. It's been fairly easy for me, and I've actually had a pretty decent time with it. So I don't really, with that in mind, I have heard the same thing about law school. Oh, wait until you get to law school. It's going to be so difficult. It's just going to, completely steamroll you. And honestly, I'm just, at this point, I'm like, probably not. I mean, like, maybe a little difficult, maybe something new, but I'm always up for a challenge and, of course, try and be quick to learn. So hopefully it won't be that hard, but I will think about reading what you suggested.
And Enforcer, I just saw Kevin Keys say in the live chat, just what the world desperately needs. 1 or 2 more lawyers and a politician. and Kevin, yes, we do need more lawyers because guess what? Most people don't like them, but when you need them, you sure do love them then.
Listen, Kevin, I gotta say this. If the world didn't have lawyers, then who was going to rip you off? Also, speaking of which, one profession that I think gets away with not having a lot of heat thrown at them, consider, talking about like professions that require doctorates, is the medical field, because not to key all into a lot of our personal life, but we've had to have a very recent run-in with hospitals and how they operate. And I've got to say that if you ever go to the emergency room and you're in very bad shape, you might as well count yourself as dead because by the time they get you back to do anything, you might as well be dead by the amount of time they have you waiting. I don't know if that's a recent staffing issue or what, but honestly, I feel based off of what we had to deal with, and if that's a national issue, I feel like that requires some attention from the government to try and find some way to skirt around that, fix the issue incredibly quickly, and try and get things a little bit more efficient, or at least have the capacity or the manpower to deal with the influx of patients, regardless of what they're from, whether it be a pandemic or just the daily life. But still, I do have to say, the world always does need a couple of more lawyers and politicians, but I will tell y'all this. As a politician, and I know that a lot of people say this, and, a lot of them really honestly end up not really doing this, but I don't like how politicians always skirt around the bush. Now, everyone does that. That's an equal critique of both sides. We're not going to... I pray to God, please, whenever I talk about politics, this is not the moment for everyone to start slamming the other party that you don't like, and I'm not agreeing with you necessarily. Whenever I say stuff like this, I'm always saying this about both parties. It's not trying to point out one over the other. But a lot of politicians never speak the truth. If you ask them a question like... And I feel like this can be a pretty fair criticism right here. What was that guy, the independent who ran in 2016, Matthew? Gary Johnson?
I think so.
Gary Johnson was asked at one point, what did he think about the situation in Mosul? And he said, what? He was like, what's Mosul? And everyone called him an idiot. But honestly, I found that to be pretty fair, actually, because a normal politician would have said this. They would have said this exact thing. Well, I think the situation in Mosul is incredibly concerning, and I'll make sure to check with my people because I do think it requires some attention. We should be looking into it to find a resolution to the matter. That's what they would have said, although they would have had no clue what was going on, honestly. But that guy, while he was pretty, just being honest, he was pretty dumb all around. He almost knew nothing about anything. I liked his honesty in that specific moment, saying, what is Mosul? Because at that point, you're like, well, he knows nothing about Mosul. You might as well not really expect an answer from him on that. And I feel like if politicians were just more honest about what they knew and what they were thinking, I believe a lot more people in the public would be happy. Like, there's always problems. And, of course, politicians want to never say that they don't know the fix to a problem. But if I was a politician looking at something that seemed to have a pretty tough fix or maybe no fix, I would just say, we're looking into it. It looks like it's going to be a pretty slippery slope to deal with. It looks like there may not be any fix to the situation, but we're going to try and find one, but don't, hold out for anything. There's no guarantees that this will actually work or happen or not. And I feel like if politicians just talked like that, a lot of people would be happier with what's going on instead of constantly being lied to that there's always a fix to a problem or everything's figured out or they know everything. Because that's always how every politician around the world works. Because, everyone always thinks if you say otherwise, it won't look good for the cameras. But with that, I hope that kind of does, Oh, wait a minute. Thank you very much. Gary, they were actually talking about Aleppo, not Mosul. They were kind of in the same situation at the same time. And so I accidentally mistook Mosul for Aleppo, but Aleppo's actually over here in Syria. And Mosul was over here as well. And both of them went through hell on earth for a couple of years during the whole entire ISIS fiasco in the middle of Iraq and Syria. But by good fortune, Mosul has, of course, been liberated for almost 2 years at this point from ISIS, as well as Aleppo. But now Aleppo is kind of a little bit contended in between the Turks and the Bashar al-Assad regime, and so nothing's really changed in Aleppo, but Mosul is kind of, I guess you could say, on the up and up, at least for Iraq. But with that, thank you very much for clarifying that for me. And anyways, now that we've talked about that a little bit too much, we're now going to be moving on to the next question.
All right, and next up we have a super chat from White Lightning 777, who puts in a $40 donation and says 40,000 demilitarized is a good thing.
And I do agree. And as Operator Starsky would always say, they have become good Russians, and they have definitely done a pretty good deal to make sure that Russians have been demilitarized. The Russians, of course, went into the war with a special military operation, but it appears that the Ukrainians have been on the philosophy of a special cleanup operation, as the Russians have posed almost no real threat to them rather than the occasional instance like Mariupol or Lysychansk, and they've been cleaning up Russian soldiers like no tomorrow. In fact, I think the New York Department of Sanitation ought to reach out to the Ukrainian army and see if they can clean up New York, because if anyone knows anything about taking out the trash, apparently it's the Ukrainian army. And so with that, I hope that does answer your question, and I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we have now reached the end of this question segment. We're now going to be moving on to the next one, and I of course see everyone always talking about, politics. I always regret bringing up anything that is a semblance to American politics, because while I try and keep the critiques neutral, somehow everyone always wants to make it a soapbox to talk about their political ideologies or opinions. And of course, we don't pick a side here politically on this channel, even if we will in the future cover anything inside America. We're going to always make it politically neutral. And so if I ever say anything about politics here in the United States, it's always going to be neutral, and a request, and we're also going to enforce that the chat also remains neutral, and that neither side, of course, because everyone always takes the opportunity, always tries to leverage the moment to try and talk for their side and do whatever. So please make sure to refrain from political chat in the comments, specifically any political chat focused on America, because it's always incredibly contentious, usually leads to fights, and that's not really fun for anyone down there. And so with that, we're now moving on into the next bit of news, starting off in the Kharkiv area. And to start off, at the front lines today, we've seen the Kraken in action. And do I have to say anything more than that? And so, without further ado, here's the video, a montage of the Kraken Special Forces operating in the Kharkiv area. Pretty nice little montage here. Of course, compiled over the entirety of the war, but still a huge credit to the Kraken Special Forces unit, which is operating somewhere in the Kharkiv area. You see them capturing prisoners, moving through towns, and generally doing a good bit of work against the Russians. Once again, a huge credit to all the Ukrainian soldiers in the nation that are fighting for the country, but of course, huge credit to the Kraken, because we have seen them multiple times throughout the entirety of the war, and they have been one of the heaviest fighting units, and as far as we can tell, they've gotten the lowest amount of rotations out of the front lines. We almost get news and reports of what they're doing weekly, and so I have to give huge credit to the soldiers there, because they are doing a massive amount of work and helping to hold back the Russians and eventually turn the tide where they can be pushed back out. With that, we're now going to be moving on to news from inside of Kharkiv City, where we can see some really good news today, as there's been a celebration for some newlyweds. According to the caption here, the sapper here in the video got married, and the whole entire team of the State Emergency Service came out to congratulate the two. And so I'm going to show you all that right here. This is a very nice little video. We now see the fire trucks driving off. Wow, that was from the Kharkiv airport, actually. But what a nice little ceremony for that little wedding. And of course, a happy moment in this war out of all the gloom and misery that we're always seeing. With that, other things have been happening across Kharkiv City today, where we can see that the Ukrainian police have decided that someone's had a little bit too much to say that's stirring up a lot of, I guess you could say, unrest in the country. Apparently, there was someone inside of the city of Kharkiv that was spreading pro-Russian propaganda, pretty much, and fakes to freak out the Ukrainian populace, and so the police decided that he's done this a little bit too much and went to arrest him. We can also see that he put up a Tide ad here. And that is just too much. The police have arrived to arrest him for the Tide ad. Of course, he's been saying pro-Russian propaganda in all seriousness. And it is important to always go and make sure that such things like this are quelled during a war. Just in case y'all do not know, the United States government will do the exact same thing during wartime. That precedent was laid out during the Lysychansk versus United States case in the Supreme Court, where it was decided by a majority opinion in the Supreme Court that a citizen does not have a right to, I guess you could say, assemble or protest if it is going to impede wartime activities. You'll may want to go look into that because it's actually a little bit interesting, and it does lay out a precedent that this is normal during war. And I'm saying all of this just because I know someone's about to say, but they're imposing on his free speech. There's a time when free speech is usually suspended, and it's usually during a war, as it's an emergency situation. And if you let free speech run amok during those times, usually the country can fall apart if you just let it run rampant. The United States learned that during World War I, and it appears that the Ukrainians are continuing on that idea up till today. And so that's the end of the video. And it's interesting to see that the Ukrainian police are making sure to keep an eye on people who are spreading pro-Russian propaganda and make sure that they do not spread, I guess you could say, unrest and fear amongst the public. An incredibly important thing to look out for and make sure that it doesn't happen during a war, because those lies can lead to mass pandemonium, and mass pandemonium can lead to retreats, routes, and withdrawals, and also the civilian population being demoralized at a time that they shouldn't be. So with that, we're now going to be moving on to the last bit of news from the Kharkiv area, where we've seen a Kharkiv tram and the after effects on it after shelling occurred on the city once more. That's a lot of damage. It's unfortunate to see. Hopefully no one was inside of that tram and was injured or killed. And as far as we can tell, it doesn't really look like there was any remnants of people in there. So hopefully no one was inside of it. Maybe it was a tram inside of a rail yard, but still unfortunate to see. And it does show that the Russians are still targeting civilian infrastructure as best as they can. We're now going to be moving out of the Kharkiv city area, and we're now going to be moving over to the Chuyev area, which of course we noted on the heat map is showing no activity whatsoever. Moving on further down the line past the Balaklia area, we've also seen that absolutely no activity has occurred here either, or in the Izium direction, or in the Slovyansk direction. In fact, nothing's happened on the northern side of the finger near the Seversky Donets River. However, we have seen some videos in some instances from the Severodonetsk area showing the aftermath of what's happened there. And so, here's the video of a Ukrainian family driving around the ruins of Severodonetsk city and showing you what Russian liberation will bring. The damage is, of course, endless, like the Russians bring everywhere. It looks exactly the same as Mariupol, Chernihiv, Sumi, Kharkiv. Destruction as far as the eye can see. The Russians did not spare a single building. And with that, we are going to move on out of this bit of news, and we're now going to move into the next one, showing a little bit of a phantom of the past. It's brand new footage we have not seen on this channel before, and so we made sure to include it tonight. But it is somewhat old footage from that, of course, famous battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, showing building clearing occurring by Ukrainian forces back when the battle was still ongoing. And so here's the footage of Ukrainian soldiers, of course, bravely fronting the Russians in the city and trying to push them back out. You see them running around through the stairwells and outside. It's a very fast montage, and it's very difficult to describe everything that's happening on film because it's happening so fast. But they were definitely trying their hardest to keep the Russians out. Of course, in the end, their efforts were somewhat in vain, as they did eventually get pushed out of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, but not without inflicting massive Russian casualties. And so, in that regard, as far as defensive war goes, it was to their advantage, and they were able to inflict enough losses on the Russians that by the time they made it out of Lysychansk, the Russians had to declare that all forces would come to a stop in that area to rest and regroup because they had taken so many losses. Well, with that, we're now going to be moving out of the area of Severodonetsk and back across the river more towards the front lines, where we can then see a journalist from Russia doing something a little bit stupid. They were literally blown away by the artillery. Now, y'all may be thinking, oh my god, we're about to see something graphic. No, you're not. Just watch this video, and y'all are about to see how they were blown away.
333!
A little stupid, isn't he? Let's watch him go flying like a little lemming on a video game. Again. I don't know if you can see this, Matthew, but this guy went flopping like a fish.
I need the sound effect from the other guy screaming in the other video.
Yeah! Wait a minute! Matthew, that's the same... Oh my god, Matthew, that's the same little tripod, like, gimbal thing we have.
Oh, it's an Osmo.
Yeah, it is. There, a major Russian news company is using the exact same gimbal we ended up getting when we were trying to film a video live. And it blew the camera off the mount. Apparently, the blast was so strong, the magnet, which attaches the camera to the gimbal, just completely ripped off, and the camera and the phone went flying. Oh my gosh. That's hilarious. Massive fail for the Russian propagandists, of course. They're trying not to be out there and do what everyone does, which is record their lines during the firing of the artillery, but it looks like this guy was literally blown away, and I guess you could say he's gone with the wind. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of the Luhansk area, well, specifically the Lysychansk area, and we're now going to be moving behind the lines to something I showed in the summary video today, and I had to say was incredibly questionable. We saw supposed nurses walking around Luhansk and handing out candy, well, chocolate, But I have to say, the way these women are dressed, I'm largely assuming they have no medical training whatsoever. And so here's the video, and I'm going to let Matthew see it because I think this is the first time he'll have seen it. And I'll just let you weigh in, Matthew, on what you think these nurses really are. So here's the video.
Сегодня раздаем шоколад, который называется Алёшка. Здесь нарисован мальчик, который всем уже давно известен. Он ждет наших военных с победой. Он провожает их на войну с горечью, переживаниями. И поэтому мы сегодня раздаем эти шоколадки жителям Луганской Народной Республики в честь нашей победы, в честь освобождения Луганской Народной Республики. А это Алёшка, символ победы, мальчик, который стоял и встречал, провожал военных.
Как вам такая акция?
Очень интересно. Спасибо большое. Главное, у нас теперь картинка у ребенка.
Ну, это символ победы.
Да, мы патриотические военные песни поем, поэтому я думаю, ребенку это очень будет интересно. Спасибо. Классно, красиво, хорошо. Очень нравится.
Ну,
Приятно очень даже.
Когда война такие вот акции, моменты, как...
Просто хоть на душе аж радостнее становится. Спасибо большое за такие акции. Классно, спасибо большое.
What do you think about that, Matthew?
I have a strange feeling that those aren't nurses.
You know, I want to introduce y'all to a meme of Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear Medical School meme. Hopefully the Disney lawyers don't come after me for this, but when I saw this is what popped up in my head. I don't believe that man has ever been to medical school. And I don't think any of them have been to medical school whatsoever. If nurses walk around dressed like that, I would largely assume they came from the gentleman's club and not the hospital. And I think there's really not a lot to add to that. That was probably the weirdest propaganda stunt I've seen the Russians pull during this war. And I had to show it to y'all because it was just bizarre. And so with that, we're now going to be moving...
And what exactly is on the front of the candy bar exactly?
Like some little kid in a tanker outfit. Let's go back and look at that.
Is it some kind of propaganda of sorts?
Let's look at that again real quick. Okay, we're going to mute it. And we're going to move through. Okay, so here's the chocolate bars. The Willy Wonka chocolate bars. Hang on. For some reason, the video's not loading. You still there, Matthew?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. We're going to click refresh real quick and see if that'll help us. Refresh will save us. So let's go back. Let's see here. There we go. All right. Come on, video. Work with me. All right, we'll just have to wait for it to get there. So give us just a second. Hopefully it'll load to that point. That is just weird. This is pretty weird right here.
They had to get the outfit from the costume store.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this honestly feels like James May when they were in Japan and they were going to go into the girl cafe or the maid cafe or whatever, and the guy was like,
yeah, he was like, that's a bit pervy.
Yeah, he was like, that's a bit pervy. I don't really know about that. I feel like this is like that same category right here. But let's look at this. It says, okay, so it's got a little kid in a tanker outfit wearing a tanker helmet with a salute, and it says, Aleshka. What does that mean? What is it?
If somebody can decipher that and put it in the chat, I'd be really curious to know.
Yes, I would like to know, what does Aleshka mean? And then it says, Timvni chocolate. And of course, chocolate is chocolate, but what does the rest of it mean? Because I would like to know. But these are definitely not nurses, I can tell you that. If you stub your toe or something, I think you're going to be lost with these. It's just creepy to look at. It makes me cringe. But anyways, that's what the Russians are putting out for propaganda. I don't know what this really was supposed to do, rather than be weird and creepy and handing out sawdust-filled chocolate to folks in the LPR, but just weird. So with that, we're now going to be moving on. Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Aloyshka, dark chocolate. So apparently, it's not even a good kind of chocolate. It's dark chocolate. I don't know if Russians like that kind of stuff. I actually like milk chocolate a lot more than dark chocolate, but man, you don't even get anything good out of the deal. You got these weirdo people. I mean, like, they're walking down the street at the very beginning of this video like a mob, you know, like an SS unit or something back there. Look at them. They go on a line walking street. It's about to be the showdown of the OK Corral back there. They're gonna whip out revolvers and gun down someone in the street. But this is just a weird thing. It's just incredibly weird. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of Luhansk and away from that weirdness. You'll need to stay away from that. And I saw some people saying weird comments, of course, and I knew that was probably going to happen, but y'all need to keep away from that. That's a bad thing right there. And so with that, we're now going to be moving back to the front lines, back to normalcy, and we're now going to see the 22nd Brigade destroying an MTLB with its T-64BM. Not a BV, but a BM. When you see the MTLB right there, and look at it, it's an MTLB marked as Orc. And here, amongst the trees, is the Predator, the T-64BM. You now see the MTLB getting smacked by the T-64 shell, which is one of the few times we've seen armor action actually knocking out other armored vehicles in this war. It's a very rare occurrence to see. And also notice how the I guess you could say pressure and gas coming out of the barrel of the cannon has actually bent the grass in front of it, and you can actually kind of see where the tank is based off of where all of the we're going to call it grass. I know it's probably rye or unripe wheat, but still, you can see it's all bent down. That's really interesting. And now the MTLB is roasting. And it's good to see that another Z tank has gone up in flames. So with that is the end of the video, and we're now going to be moving on to the next one, also somewhere in the Bakhmut, Popasna area. Here we've seen a supposed volunteer in the Donbass region, and their own camera footage from their time there. And so here's the video of a Russian volunteer somewhere in the Donbass. Of course, they have to put music over it. We can see them walking around. We can see them holding an AK, of course, flagging their friends. We can now see them going into a cellar. We can now see them in a tree line. I feel like I'm reading a Dr. Seuss book. We can now see them petting a cat, reloading an RPG. Now they have an SPG-9. Now they're holding an AK. Now they're walking down the street. Haven't really seen a lot of action from them. You see that they were joined by a dog that they surprisingly hadn't shot or ate at that point, still with them. Now they're trying to lug the SPG-9 through the trees. Looks like they're having a difficult time with that. And with that, that's the end of the video. And it's interesting to see what the Russians are doing, at least on their camera footage. And also to go back here just to check. I don't know if that's... that appears to be a white armband. It looks like there may have been a little bit of a filter on the camera. But still, an interesting... Wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Misread it. This is GoPro footage of a Russian volunteer fighting for Ukraine in the Donbass. And so there we have it. That's why it looked like it was a little white. That's honestly like a whitish yellow. I couldn't really tell what it was. I was like, maybe it's a filter, but that's what also kind of like cued me in. Maybe these are Ukrainian Russians, but still, it's nice to see the Russian Foreign Legion is still fighting on the front lines, and pretty interesting to see, although it looks like they were having a pretty hard time lugging that SPG-9 through the trees. Once again, another reason why it's good to have a car. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Luhansk area, and as far as all of this news has gone and indicating what's happening in the front lines here, while there's been a little bit of a pick of activity, and we have heard that the Russians attempted a small push towards Bakhmut today, it was repulsed, and there has been no further action in this area. And by and large, we're believing it will stay this way for a considerable amount of time, considering that the Russians have largely run out of resources. We're now going to start moving down towards the Orlivka, Donetsk, Southern Front, and international news, and also the speech from President Zelenskyy. But before we get to all of that, we're going to take a quick pause and answer 3 questions from the chat, and after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then move on to the next segment of news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and first up, we have a $22 donation from Dupper Bob, who says, no question, I just want to say that you guys are doing a great job.
Well, thank you so much, Bob, for the support, and I'm glad you are enjoying this channel and that you're helping us to keep it running. And of course, it's a high honor to both Matthew and me whenever anyone says that they're very happy with what we're doing, and you know, they're of course proud of the channel and everything, because we put in a lot of effort into trying to make sure that this stream is enjoyable and it's hospitable to stay in the chat, among other things. Now, that's one thing that a lot of people have had, well, not a lot, but of course the people we end up banning have gripes about. But one thing I want to make clear is that Matthew and me are not against free speech. Free speech is the cornerstone of democracy and, of course, the civilized world. But in the advent of what's going on in this war, we do have to always make some limitations. And also, just because you have an ability to talk somewhere does not mean that that is the place to say whatever you would like. And so that's why we always have the rule that American politics specifically, and then also the rest of international politics, at least domestically within their own countries, largely isn't allowed here on stream, because we like to focus on the war in Ukraine. And back in the day, at the very start of this war, a lot of people wanted to come in here and use the war as a soapbox, and they wanted to use thousands of dead Ukrainians and Russians as a soapbox to further their own political opinions here in the United States. And they also wanted to make it sound like domestic American politics directly tied into how the war was playing out on the ground. And it really doesn't. And on top of that, that's also a very sick thing to do, is to use thousands of dead people to try and further your political agenda. So we, of course, have restrictions on what people can say in here. And I thank you so much for enjoying the stream, because, you know, while we have to do that, we, of course, do that in the effort of trying to make the stream more hospitable. There are a lot of live streams out there that allow people to say whatever and wherever, and I have been there, and I've noticed that usually, 1, there's not a lot of people watching it. 2, if you get in there and you say a different opinion, this is usually what's happened over time, is that stream started out as neutral, and then everyone hopped in and had their own opinions, and they started to say them. And of course, when everyone has a disagreement online, what do? Well, you don't logically argue things, you just get in a fight. And so eventually, a fight broke out, and one group would entirely leave, and then another group would literally make up the core of this viewer base, and also everyone in the live chat, and they would pretty much gatekeep it. And so if you ever came in and had a different opinion, they would just try and shut that person down and pretty much run them out of the stream. So we always make sure to try and keep this stuff pretty calm and level in here, and pretty reasonable as well, because it would be inhospitable if we just allowed, you know, fights and chaos to break out over such things like American politics, especially when we're talking about the war in Ukraine. So with that, thank you once again so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy the stream, and hopefully you enjoy it for all of the reasons and all of the effort we put into making sure that it is an enjoyable thing to be a part of. And so with that, we're on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
And real quick, before I move on to the next one, I actually put up a poll just a moment ago, sort of tying back into what we were discussing earlier about Taiwan, and I was really curious to know what the viewers thought about this. And the question was, should the U.S. Speaker of the House visit Taiwan with a congressional delegation? Now, before anybody says it, this is nonpartisan, not getting into politics, just a simple matter of international relations between countries. 71% of you said that yes, it sends a clear message to China. 17% said maybe it needs more planning. And 12% of you said it is escalatory or too risky. So I definitely agree with the 70%. And I'm actually quite shocked that China would threaten our people from going to Taiwan, which is a free country at the moment, basically threatening war subliminally. And what are your thoughts, Enforcer?
Well, I'd have to definitely agree with the 71%. I have to put it this way. The United States will do whatever the United States wishes. And while other countries can launch a formal complaint, a diplomatic protest against what we do, the United States, at the end of the day, will do what we wish. And while, of course, there are large political divides amongst parties here in the United States, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, regardless of who you are, she is an American. And as an American, we all need to stand as the same and on the same team when facing foreign countries, and I do believe, regardless of political affiliation, that she should be able to travel to Taiwan, because the United States, if wanting to travel to Taiwan and have official diplomatic relationships with them, should be able to do so unimpeded, because we are the United States, and for that reason alone, we have the right to do such a thing. To allow the Chinese to say, y'all are not going to go to Taiwan or else we're going to cause large escalations, is an affront to our own sovereignty and our own ability to conduct foreign affairs as the United States of America, a sovereign nation.
It's very bold, very bold.
And it's certainly bold as well. Honestly, at this point, considering that I have heard some claims, at least on mainstream TV, although I believe they're incredibly far-fetched, that the Chinese Air Force, the People's Liberation Army Air Force, would attempt to shoot down the Speaker of the House's plane while flying to Taiwan. I think the best thing to do would be to provide the best security possible and load the Speaker of the House onto an aircraft carrier and bring them to Taiwan that way. That way they'll have the protection of a screening force for an entire aircraft carrier's fleet, as well as the protection of the entire aircraft carrier's air wing. I think that would be the best way to get them there, because if the Chinese want to play ball, then we'll up the stakes a little bit. But I just do not understand why the Chinese believe that they'll have the ability to tell us that we cannot have dealings with a sovereign nation off of their coast. It's entirely asinine, it's insane, and to think that they have the audacity to do something like that to us tells us that we ought to kind of start to up the stakes and see if they'll actually be up to snuff with what they're saying. And so with that, I hope that does address the poll, and I hope a lot of Americans, of course, if you're from another country and would like to agree, please feel free if you would like to add in, because of course it's a interesting discussion right now considering what the Chinese have said. If you would like to say, maybe it's not a smart idea, or maybe it is, I would like to hear everyone's side, but in my opinion, I believe the United States has a right as a sovereign country to be able to visit any country they wish. And so if the Speaker of the House wants to go to Taiwan, they will go to Taiwan. And so with that, I hope that does address the poll, and we are on to the next question.
All right. And next up, we have a $21 super chat from Jose Ruano, who says, "Hello again, guys. I keep enjoying your content, and I hope you were able to check the scope video. I'm not a fan of scopes myself, but TrackPoint has built-in Wi-Fi, so you can buy shoot glasses and a screen built in on them."
And I thank you very much for the support. And while we haven't been able to look at the scope, I am glad that you're also an Iron Sights enjoyer. I think Iron Sights is just, I don't know, to me I feel like it's an actual test of marksmanship, because if you have a sight where you can literally see the hairs on a flea at 600 yards, I kind of feel like that takes away the fun of it, because you've over-engineered the gun so much. It really isn't a test of individual marksmanship. It's more of a test of how well can you calibrate the sights. That's kind of my opinion. But then again, I've hardly shot scoped guns so little actually, that of course there's a whole bunch of other things at play when it comes to marksmanship, like breathing control and the steadiness of the hand, and of course pulling the trigger incredibly slowly and methodically to where you really don't know. This is the way everyone always says it. You really won't know when the gun fires. It's just going to be a gentle pull on the trigger until it surprises you, and everyone always wants to say it that way. But still, a lot goes into marksmanship, but I've never been one for scopes either. But I will try and check that out. And it is interesting here that there is that kind of scope technology out there where you can pretty much have a scope camera on them, like we saw in that video yesterday. And so thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment, because I do think it's a cool scope. And maybe one day I'll look into scopes, although I honestly I've just never really been a fan of them. But with that, I think that was our last question of the section, wasn't it, Matthew?
I think we might have had one more to go.
All right, and so with that, we'll answer this last question, and then we'll be moving on to the remainder of the news for the night.
All right, and the final question for this segment goes to DC Williams, who puts in a $50 super chat and says, FYI, number 1, Gary Johnson was a 2016 Libertarian presidential candidate. Number 2, the US of A is a constitutional republic, and James Madison in Federalist 10 basically trashes the very idea of the then future US of A becoming a democracy.
Now, thank you very much for the support, DC Williams. And I'm glad to have you back. I haven't seen you a lot in the live chat often, and it's good to once again have you supporting the channel. And yes, Gary Johnson was the 2016 Libertarian presidential candidate, and he actually became pretty well known, really because of his eccentrics, I guess you could say. He was a pretty eccentric fellow. But moving beyond that, the United States of America is a constitutional republic. I, of course, say it's a federal republic because it's, of course, a federal government structure, and it's, of course, a representative republic. Well, representative democracy, which is the definition of a republic, where people vote for a representative to go to the government and represent their interests. So that is true. I do agree with that. And also, James Madison in Federalist 10, which I believe we've had to read before. Matthew and me, I think we both read it. It was required reading in school. He did trash the idea of the United States becoming a democracy, but at the same time, I can agree with the Federalist 10, but on others, and I'll try and make this brief so that we're not going down a massive rabbit hole. In others, I do believe that a populist opinion should be more, I guess you could say, encouraged and more supported within the actual democratic structure of the country. If we look, for example, at a country like Switzerland, which a lot of people don't know about, but it actually has a working democracy, and it's actually incredibly interesting. They based theirs off of the United States'. But the problem is that no one during the Swiss Constitutional Convention of 1848, and of course, if you're in, we'll cover that for another time. I won't even make an aside on that. But the Constitutional Convention after the Sunderland War in Switzerland in 1848. No one in Switzerland had a really firm understanding of what the American democratic system was like. And I know it's a republic, but still, it is by and large something of a democracy. People do vote for their officials, and so what they did is that they tried to make their constitution as similar to the United States as possible, without really knowing how exactly it worked. And so they ended up coming up with a system which over time has become very interesting to me, and I think there's some things to be learned about it. For example, the Swiss Confederation, it's not a republic, it's more of a confederation made up of the cantons, which are kind of like the states that make up Switzerland. The citizens actually can have a mass referendum whenever they wish on any law that's been passed recently, and they have a certain amount of time to get a certain amount of signatures, and if they can get an amount of signatures saying they do not like that law will then be held up to a national referendum where everyone can vote whether they approve of the law that's been passed by Congress or not. And if they disapprove of the law is immediately struck down, so they pretty much serve as the Supreme Court in a way in Switzerland. The law can immediately be struck down, and then the Congress will either have to come up with a brand new law, more suiting and more fitting to the public's wishes, or they'll just have to scratch the idea altogether. And while this is a political topic, this isn't an American political topic, and this is more of like a philosophy of the government. So with that, well, now I see a lot of people kind of considering that as political, but still, when I'm not talking about American political parties, we're talking about democratic structure. And I do think that would be something interesting to see if we could implement here in the United States as a way for direct referendums to be held in the public, so that way there can be no more complaints about political parties and how they're snuffing out the freedoms of Americans or trying to destroy the country. If the mass of the public didn't like a law that was being passed in the government, a referendum could be held and the law could simply be upheld and then passed, or it could be shot down. I think that would be something that would fix, I feel, a decent amount of issues that we currently have in the United States, with everyone always trying to say that elected representatives don't actually represent them, because then the citizen themselves would have a more direct way of saying whether they like a law or not. But anyways, we're now going to move on, because while we don't really touch on politics a lot, that is getting really close to that territory, because it could easily get into that kind of discussion. But still, I do thank you very much for the support, DC Williams, and I thank you very much for bringing up those facts. And with that, we have now reached the end of this question segment. And yes, I do know, I just saw someone else say this as well. Someone said direct democracy has its downsides. Yes, everything has a downside. There's no such thing as a perfect solution. And that's why whenever I hear... and this is kind of my opinion, whenever I hear anyone saying this philosophy is this idea is going to destroy the country, it's terrible, this one's so much better, honestly, every single option has a downside to it. There's always pluses and minuses to everything. So while I'm saying I think that would be a pretty good option, there's still, of course, some disadvantages that do come with it. But with that, we're now going to be moving on out of this question segment, and I hope I've answered everyone's questions fairly well, and that we've had a pretty interesting little endeavor into that side of things. So with that, we're now going to be moving on into the remainder of the news for the night from the Donetsk area, the southern front, as well as the international news here in the United States and Switzerland, and then we'll be returning to Kyiv for the speech from President Zelenskyy. And so without further ado, we're going to move down into the Orlivka area, where we've seen a fire break out at a factory within the city's perimeter. We don't know what's caused the fire. We don't know if it's a sabotage attack or an artillery barrage, but it is interesting to see, and hopefully we'll be able to get more information on that in the future. With that, we're now going to be moving down to the southern part of the Donetsk front. And before we move on, I'm going to gloss over this area. There's been no activity to really speak of, so there's just these videos to show, but no frontline activity. We've gotten some drone footage of the no man's land in between the Donetsk People's Republic and Ukraine, and it is shockingly similar to what you would believe a World War I battlefield would look like. And so, let me see. This is the best graphics we can get. And here's the video of the no man's land. It's unbelievable to see the landscape that exists in between both sides in this area, and it gives you a really good idea of what the war is like here. Of course, wars have moved on beyond the mass infantry charge across no man's land to the other side's trenches, but still, the topography and the layout of the land, you might as well say this is the Battle of the Somme, or the Battle of Verdun, or Tannenberg. It looks almost just like it. The only difference is that it's 100 years later, and more advanced technologies are being used, like the helicopter, the jet bomber, the fighter aircraft, and such things like that. And even those started to exist in some form during World War I. With that, that's the end of the video, and I believe that is one of the most insane things I've seen, is that we have come so far technologically, yet strategically and tactically in the field, there is no difference in between the war of today and the war of 100 years ago. And it kind of gives you an idea of, while we feel that we've made so much progress from World War I, specifically in the area of war, a war can easily revert back to static trench defenses on both sides that look exactly like they did during the Somme. With that, we're now going to be moving out to the Donetsk region and moving across the southern front line to an area south of Zaporizhia. We don't know exactly where this video was made, but we can see drone strikes being conducted by Ukrainian forces on the Russians. And so with that, here's the video. I mean, of course, see a burning wheat field, a common sight in the southern area of the country. Fire continues to burn, and we can now see Ukrainian forces moving around the countryside and getting ready to strike back at the Russians. You now see them loading up a DJI Mavic with a bomblet. And now they've found their target. It looks like an MTLB. And they've now dropped the bomblet. It falls onto the APC, slamming into the front right side of it, and most likely disabling it, although we're not entirely sure. And so with that, that's the end of the video. And a pretty interesting one at that. And it's cool to see that the Ukrainian forces are still knocking out armored vehicles in the southern area of the country, although really no hardcore activity is occurring of any kind from either side. There's no offensive actions occurring from either side, but we do see the Ukrainians still trying to rack up the casualty count for the Russians down in that area. Now we're going to be moving out of the country, and we're going to be moving to Switzerland, which we were talking about just a little bit earlier in the question segment. I might make a video about that in the future, about how Swiss democracy works, Because I did see some people saying that a more direct democracy like that could lead to totalitarian dictators getting in charge. And, you know, of course, I would make a retort to that, but of course not here. That's something for another time, or maybe the question segment after. But we can see that according to this news article, the Swiss have sent out an invitation that they will train Ukrainian sappers in that craft. This is one of the first times we've ever seen the Swiss break neutrality of any sort. In fact, this whole entire war has been a first for Switzerland in many ways, as they've now broken this age-old tradition of neutrality that they've had for hundreds of years, ever since I guess you could say, the times before the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Well, they were really French-aligned at that point and fought for the French, but we won't go into that. And we can see here that Switzerland has declared they will train Ukrainian sappers. And I can't believe this, honestly. This is insane. And so with that, there's not really much to comment on there. It's just that the Swiss are pretty much breaking their neutrality at this point, which is insane, and it shows you how bad off the Russians are, is that really the only officially neutral country in the world that stayed neutral through even World War II has ended up joining the side of the West in condemning the Russians and trying to support the Ukrainians. And I have to say, good on them, because while I do understand that their neutrality is an age-old tradition, it is good to see them stand up for what they believe is right. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Switzerland, and we're now going to be moving across the sea to the United States, where we've also gotten big news of another kind. Apparently, Secretary Blinken will be speaking with Lavrov soon about the release of American prisoners. Of course, I knew that the United States government would not, at least try an attempt of getting the Americans who have been captured back into American hands, and it appears that soon Secretary Blinken will be talking with Lavrov about releasing the American prisoners. As far as I've heard right now, the Americans will also be offering the release of a Russian prisoner, kind of a fair exchange, one prisoner for another, to try and get all of the Americans back that have been captured and have become prisoners during the course of this war. Hopefully that is successful, and hopefully we'll have our of course, citizens back incredibly soon. Not really a lot to comment on there, rather than the fact that that is actually happening, and this post will take you to a news article that tells you a little bit more about it in detail if you would like to click on the link in the description and look at that map. We're now going to move down very close to where I'm from, near Columbus, Georgia, which kind of also extends into Alabama. If you've ever been there, pretty interesting place. Anyways, more HIMARS are on the way, and we've seen them moving around in the area as they're being prepared for transport. And so, here's the video of these 3 HIMARS being prepared to be sent to Ukraine. When you see them driving down the interstate. It looks like there might be 4 of them right there. Hate that I wasn't out on the interstate today to see that, but that would have been pretty cool. But still, it's great to see that the United States is sending an additional 4 HIMARS to Ukraine, and I cannot wait to see them in action as well, as each HIMARS is able to inflict destructive amounts of damage on Russian communication supplies and command structures, and help the Ukrainians to turn the tide of this war in ways that the Russians would have believed impossible just months before. And so with that, we've now covered all of the news in the United States, and we're now going to reach all the way back across the sea and into Ukraine to listen to the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And so, without further ado, here is President Volodymyr Zelenskyy's speech.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Коротко звітую про добу, що минає. Перше. Щодо Антонівського мосту в Херсоні та інших переправ області. Звичайно, всі вони будуть відбудовані, але вже нами. Робимо все для того, щоб в окупантів не залишалося жодних логістичних можливостей на нашій землі. Які б не були у них плани, ми їх зламаємо. І будемо звільняти нашу територію воєнними, дипломатичними і всіма іншими доступними інструментами, поки не вийдемо на законні кордони України. Друге. Сьогодні Верховна Рада України погодила призначення нового генерального прокурора. Ним став Андрій Костін. Людина порядна, професійна, вміє працювати системно. Серед його найголовніших завдань суспільство бачить забезпечення усього, що необхідно для притягнення Росії до відповідальності за війну. Це співпраця з Міжнародним кримінальним судом, з державами-партнерами, які допомагають встановлювати конкретних винних серед російських військових. Це фіксація фактів, скоєних окупантами злочинів, забезпечення формування доказової бази для притягнення до кримінальної відповідальності кожного воєнного злочинця. Офіс Генерального прокурора є однією з ключових інституцій, які працюють для того, щоб усі російські вбивці і кати відповідали за скоєне проти українців. Третє. Готуємось до збільшення нашого експорту електрики споживачам в Європейський Союз. Попри таку війну, ми забезпечили рекордний термін приєднання енергомережі України до енергосистеми всієї Європи. Наш експорт дозволяє нам не тільки мати валютну виручку, але й допомагати нашим партнерам вистояти проти російського енергетичного тиску. Поступово зробимо Україну одним із гарантів європейської енергетичної безпеки саме за рахунок нашого внутрішнього виробництва електрики. Четверте, готуємось до дуже важливих політичних і дипломатичних подій, які заплановані на другу половину цього тижня. Передусім, це стосується завтрашнього відзначення Дня української державності. Але не тільки цього. Будуть ще події, будуть ще новини. Щотижнево посилюємо нашу державу, щотижнево робимо речі, які зближають нас з Європейським Союзом, і щотижнево забезпечуємо додаткові сили, щоб протистояти Росії. П'яте. Сьогодні відбулося спільне засідання Міжнародної санкційної групи під керівництвом Андрія Єрмака і Майкла Макфола за участі представників українського парламенту, керівництва Верховної Ради та фракцій і груп. Напрацьовуються нові рішення, які збільшать ціну для Росії за війну. Зокрема, є ініціатива щодо посилення відповідальності на рівні Євросоюзу за ухилення від санкцій та ініціатива щодо обов'язкового розкриття інформації про будь-які ділові контакти, спільне володіння корпоративними правами і власністю з громадянами Росії. Санкційна група Єрмака Макфола буде координувати свою роботу з представниками нашого парламенту. І ще одне. За час повномасштабної війни 160 українським воїнам я присвоїв звання Герой України. І серед них одному з найбільш ефективних українських льотчиків майору Олександру Кукурбі. У квітні у Маріїнському палаці у Білій залі Героїв України я вручив йому орден «Золота зірка». Вчора майор Кукурба загинув в бою. Це був його 100-й бойовий виліт. Справжній український герой, якого ми будемо завжди пам'ятати. Вічна пам'ять усім, хто загинув за Україну. Слава кожному і кожній, хто захищає нашу державу. Слава Україні!
And that is the end of President Zelensky's speech. And I gotta say, he looks exhausted today. But with that, that rounds out our day 154 summary. And of course, if you were here for the news alone, then the stream has ended for you. If you are new to this stream, please make sure to subscribe and also like, because it helps us to reach more people. So if you enjoyed it, it'll help other people to find it and hopefully enjoy it as well. And subscribing will let you be notified if you hit the bell button about every single stream that comes up every single day. We run Ukraine war summaries every day of the week, except for Mondays at exactly 10 p.m. Eastern time, and we cover the past 24 hours of the war every single day. We also run Sunday fundraisers, which support Ukraine through nonprofits that are currently operating there, and we upload daily summary videos, also giving a little bit of an idea of what's going on in the war. And so with that, we are now going to move into the question segment and answer all of the super chats that we've gotten and as many live chats as we can. And so, without further ado, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, and moving into the final question segment of the night. Up first, we have a $20 super chat from Will Riley, who says, Dick Cheney and myself apologize for hit and miss here of late. We are moving from Kentucky to a nuclear power plant in the Northeast, all while commuting from Kentucky to Illinois every single week. Cauliflower cauliflower crust, is it good or bad?
Cauliflower crust, is it good or bad?
I'll say bad.
I would say bad. I've never had it, but I feel like I just have a general assumption that it would be bad. Of course, I don't want to pass judgment before I try something, but for some reason that just sounds unappealing. Now, to, of course, forgive you and Dick Cheney, Will Riley, for being absentee sometimes, that is perfectly fine. Of course, real life sometimes gets in the way, and of course, it's important to make sure that you can take care of yourself and move to a nuclear power plant. Not a lot of people get to live around a nuclear power plant, and some people, when they move there, they always say that they get a nice little glow about them. Usually I tell them to go see a doctor, but still, it's great to hear that you're going to a new place, and I hope you have a lot of fun there in Illinois. I have driven through Illinois before. Well, my whole family's gone through Illinois. We went down Interstate 24, and then we turned onto Interstate 64 heading to St. Louis, and then St. Louis, whatever you like to call it, and we drove through St. Louis, we'll call it that, through Interstate 70, and yeah, there's not really a lot to say about St. Louis. Once you drive through there, you're like, eh. But I hope that you have a fun time in Illinois. I don't know a lot about it, but still, haven't really heard a lot of bad things rather than Chicago. So with that, I hope that does address that, Will Riley, and that's perfectly fine if Dick Cheney and you are traveling and trying to set yourselves up for a great future. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, and of course, it helps this channel to keep on running, and with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have a $20 donation from Senpai Arigato, who says, I just wanted to say, keep up the great work, and so with that, on to the next question.
I thought you were actually moving on to the next question there, but I thank you very much, Arigato. It, of course, helps us to keep the channel running, and I thank you so much for the support. And in honor of what you said at the end, we're going to move on to the next question, but thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $15 super chat from Michael Coleman, who says you should do the streams at night for Ukraine and have the daily updates include other world news unless China invades, in which more will be needed.
That's actually a pretty interesting idea. And one thing I have been thinking about, and since you brought that up, and thank you very much for the support, since you did bring that up, I'm going to run this by everyone. The summary videos are... I gotta say this, I support Ukraine 100%, and these streams will continue on until the end of this war. But at the same time, the summary videos take up about an hour to an hour and a half of my time per day, which makes my days go from usually 8 hours or 7.5 hours long to about 9 to 9.5 hours long per day. And the thing is that they're kind of a hit or miss. And whenever I make something like a video, I always want to make sure that it does well and that it reaches more people and more people get apprised of this news, which of course leads to more people watching these streams, more people who support the fundraisers, and more people who just enjoy the channel. And we'll hit big on some videos. We'll get 200,000 views or 100,000 views on some of them. But as of the past few days, the views have been abysmal. They've been getting around 20,000 views apiece. And for the amount of work I'm having to put into them, which is about an hour to an hour and a half, it feels like it's not really proportionate to the amount of work being put into them. And so I have been thinking about cutting out the Ukraine war summaries and just keeping the streams and moving on to doing other things, because I know that everyone wants to hear all about the war, but on top of that, I hope you all understand that me covering the war all the time, and that's all I do, it can lead me to feel burned out sometimes. And while I always power through and get through it, I've been wanting to move on to talk about other things as well, like talk about what's going on in Taiwan or what's going on in Europe or anywhere for that matter, and also move on to talk about historical topics and make videos like the government cheese one, but on more interesting topics than that. That was kind of just to test out the waters. But I have been thinking about that. And so I thank you very much for the support. That's a really good idea, and we may think about it. Because, honestly, the summaries, it's just, I don't know. At this point, I feel like now that a lot of people just watch the streams after they go live, if people want to know about the war and what's going on, the streams are there, and the summary videos just, I don't know. I mean, like, I just don't honestly, I'm just not really into the summary videos anymore, and they just add a lot of extra time to my day that could be spent doing other things like learning how to make better videos on different topics and also covering more news. Because, of course, this channel eventually does want to expand out into being a news channel that covers all kinds of news and all kinds of information and puts out things like a normal news channel would. Of course, not mainstream news. God forbid, I would never become that. But I want to do things like little specials, you know, like you'll see on other larger news networks, like a special on the moon landing. So that's not something I do, but you know what I'm saying. So with that, we're going to move on to the next one. And then someone said the stock footage in the cheese vid was bizarre. Yes, I'd agree, but of course, to explain that real quick, to actually get footage of cheese caves or anything like that was incredibly difficult. And on top of that, if you ever did find it, it was usually privately owned, and so you had to pay for a license to get it. And I found out that 20 seconds of film usually costs $400 to get a license for. And so with a 5-minute video, and I was using nothing but actual footage, let me do some math on that real quick. 5 minutes times 60, so 300. Then we divide that by 20, and then we multiply that by 400. And so if that entire video is made up of actual footage of government cheese caves or political events of the time that was real footage that was privately owned I had to get a license for, that video would have most likely costed me $6,000 to make. And so you can kind of see where the economic limitations come in with using real footage, is that it would literally bankrupt me. And that's something that I would like to do, but I don't also want to be, you know, like eating breadcrumbs and living in the streets. So with that, I hope that kind of addresses why it was so much stock footage in that. But we're on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support and for bringing up the good idea.
And next up, we have a $14 super chat from Ryan Miller, who says, Enforcer, let's sign some shells. LSA and hi from Canada.
And I thank you so much for the support, and we are getting around to signing some shells. We are working on that in the background, and I just ask that all of y'all stay patient with us, as we're going to have to try and figure out what's actually reasonable or feasible and what's not, and we're also trying to work on that in the background, but it does appear like it may take some time. So I just ask that everyone has some patience with us. We are going to get around to writing and signing some shells, but we just have to try and get through all of the process of actually getting there right now. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment, and I thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from ZyperSniper1, who says, congrats on 90,000 subscribers to the Enforcer. Road to 100,000 subs next, ? Slava LSA, Slava Enforcer, and Slava Ukraine.
And thank you so much for the support. And I do have to say, we are on that road to 100K. Right now, we're at 90,658 subscribers. And so we're almost all the way to 91,000, which means we'll only be about 9,000 away from 100,000 subscribers. And hopefully, all the way here is kind of a hit or miss. Once we reach 100,000, I can get the silver plaque. That would be really cool to me. And that's something that when I started this YouTube channel a long time ago, I was like, wow, would I ever make it to 100,000? And here I am, close to 100,000. I can't actually believe it, and that would be really cool to get there, and I think we could get there within a month at the current rate. But still, I thank you so much for the support. Thank you so much for congratulating us for 90,000, and we are definitely on that road to 100K. Of course, this channel could blow up again. You know, who knows? The YouTube algorithm is kind of an odd thing, and it could blow us up to 300,000 or 400,000, but I would just be happy with 100,000, and if we grow beyond that, that would be incredibly cool, but I still think that it would be pretty neat. Never really been focused on the subscribers so far. Usually I just focused on making sure that everyone's enjoying themselves and having a good time, but it's always in the back of my head, wow, wouldn't that be cool if I had 100,000 subs? But anyways, I thank you so much for the support, and also, Slava Ukraini, and Slava the Lee Spring Army, and thank you to the Slava for me. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
And moving on, we have a $10 super chat from Tito McLovin, who says, have you ever considered doing a reenactment of the Mazar-e-Sharif prisoner uprising of 2001 of Northern Alliance and U.S. Special Ops versus Taliban captives? It's definitely worth watching.
That would be an interesting reenactment to do. It's just that the problem is that that stuff is so recent that it's kind of taboo, because there's like this time period in the reenacting world where things are looked at, in a bad way. And right now, Vietnam is in this gray area where people look at it and they're like, oh, that's kind of neat. And then other times you'll look at it and be like, oh, that's abhorrent. They shouldn't be doing that. Because a certain amount of time has to pass, and these people who actually served and fought in that war have to age enough that it isn't really trying to, I guess, fall into the area of cosplaying them and more so honoring them. And a certain amount of time has to pass for that to happen. Usually, it's a time frame of about 50 years or more from the event that occurred. So World War I reenacting, World War II reenacting became popular around started to become popular around the same time as Saving Private Ryan came out, which was about 50 years after World War II had happened. And so you can kind of see there that was definitely the case. World War I reenacting, sadly, it just never really caught on. I don't know why, but it just didn't. Civil War reenacting, that's a tough one, because reenacting didn't really take off until the 50s anyways. Because that was when the 100th year anniversary of the Civil War was coming around. And if you're a huge history buff, the biggest moments in your life are always whenever the 100th or the 150th or the 200th or the 175th or the 125th has come around. And so when the 100th was coming around for the Civil War, of course, everyone always wanted to get in on that and have, I guess you could say, let me think of a good way to say it, a fun time reenacting history and giving honor to that specific important moment in history for the United States. And so it's kind of hard to say when there's another precedent for that. But for Vietnam, it's been 50 years. For World War II, it seems like the golden number was around 50 years. And so I think that for reenacting stuff that happened in Iraq, even during Desert Storm, it's most likely going to be another 20 years or so, or maybe even 30, until that becomes socially acceptable in the reenacting groups to do. But I thank you so much for the support, and I do think that would be a really cool reenactment to do. I just think that at this point it would have to be put to film, or not done at all, especially in the reenacting world, because the reenacting world's kind of sensitive about how, I guess you could say, veterans are honored, and we always want enough time to pass so that way it doesn't look a little farby, in a way, and also a little bit insensitive. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question, but I thank you so much for the support, and that is an interesting idea for me to put in my head for about 20 or 30 years in the future. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have another $10 super chat from Zyper Sniper 1, who says, coffee fun for the Enforcer and Matt, and keep up the great work.
Hey, and I thank you so much for the support to the coffee fund. Of course, it always helps us to keep going, and we always drink coffee. I have to drink almost like a full cup of Nitro cold brew every night to keep going, but I thank you so much for the support, because it helps us to get that coffee and it helps us to keep these streams running. And so thank you once again for the support, and thank you for giving some of that to Enforcer Matt. He'll surely enjoy some. And with that, we are on to the next question, and thank you once again for the support.
And yes, thank you very much, Zyper, for the coffee. We do appreciate you very much. And moving on, we have a $10 super chat from Kristen Adams, who says, deep thanks for keeping it nonpartisan. Your work is too important to reduce your audience to one side or the other.
And I thank you so much for the support. And while I did for a second get into the, I guess you could say, the governmental theory of a more direct democracy versus a representative democracy, I do try and keep everything as, well, in fact, that wasn't even delving into American politics. That was talking about governmental structure as a whole, which really has nothing to do with anyone in American politics. But yes, I thank you so much for enjoying that we keep things nonpartisan, because I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when covering the news. And whenever I weigh in my opinions, they're, of course, just opinions, and I always make sure they don't have a political slant on them. And for that reason, I rarely ever cover American politics, because the chat almost always goes in that direction, just because that's kind of how America has developed at this point, is that whenever politics is brought up, everyone takes it as a, well, not everyone, but some people take it as a golden opportunity to start trying to preach their political opinions. But with that, thank you once again for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy that we keep things nonpartisan in here. And in the future, if we ever cover American politics, which we most likely won't, just because of how hostile and how divided people are, it of course would be nonpartisan. But with that, thank you once again, and we're moving on to the next one.
And next up, I want to give a shout out to Chris Webb for putting in a $5 super chat, but without a comment. But thank you very much, Chris, for your support. We appreciate you very much. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from ZH, who says, let me read this one real quick. Let's see. So sadly, ZH, we're not going to be able to read that one off because that would get very deep into American partisan politics. But we appreciate the support nonetheless. And thank you so much for supporting the channel. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from David Moyers, who says, Tuva soldiers going home, Solent Green coming back, and Slava Ukraine.
Soylent Green. Let me pull that up.
I think you said Solent Green.
Solent Green. I'm not sure if it's Solent Green. How do you spell that?
Solent and then the word green.
Soylent Green. The only thing I'm getting is Soylent Green. But I do thank you very much for the support. If anyone could clarify if that's Soylent Green or Solent Green and what that means, I would like to know. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I do think that's largely true. The Russians go into the war as people, and they come back in boxes. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and thank you once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from GNF, who says, it's kind of depressing that Russia has such a bad future ahead of it due to Putin. Will Russia be in worse condition than they were at the fall of the USSR?
Well, I thank you very much for the support, GNF, and that is actually a really good question. It's kind of tough to say because they do have the foundations and the groundworks of a Western economy at this point. So I don't think they'll be as bad off coming out of the war as the USSR was. The USSR was literally on the brink of collapse, even after it dissolved and turned into the Russian Federation and all of the other countries that came out of it. So it's really hard to say if that would be the case or not. I feel like, in a way, I just feel like they wouldn't be that bad off. There's really no way to get as bad off as Soviet times. That was practically the fall of the Roman Empire for the Eastern world is how that happened. And of course they rebounded quickly because the Western world was not affected at all. In fact, it was cheering it on. But I don't think they could get that bad off because the times of the collapse of the Russian Federation, literally people were starving in the streets. Well, that could happen. But the economy was in shambles. Well, that could happen too. But also on top, well, yeah, I mean, like, I guess it could be as bad off as Soviet times because everything I'm saying now, I'm like, well, it could be like that, and it's almost like that already. And so they may be as bad off as the collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of this war. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And Enforcer, it looks like Soylent Green is actually the movie that popped up in the search results. So I'm not sure what that movie is about. If it's called Soylent Green, I think that's Soylent is a drink. I think
Soylent Green. Let's pull that up. It's from 1973. I'm gonna go to the Wikipedia here. Soylent Green is an American ecological dystopian thriller film directed by so-and-so, loosely based on the 1966 science fiction novel Make Room! Make... I don't know why my voice cracked that bad. The film combines police procedural and science fiction genres, the investigation into the murder of a wealthy businessman and a dystopian future of dying oceans and year-round humidity due to the greenhouse effect, resulting in pollution, poverty, overpopulation, euthanasia, and depleted resources. In 1973, it won the Nebula Award for Best Dramatic Presentation and the Saturn Award for Best Science Fiction Film. I have never heard about this movie, but it does sound somewhat interesting.
Interesting art there on that cover.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It looks like they're feeding people into a riot control vehicle, and there's like combine harvesters down there. Is this like supposed to be like a Malthusian take on the future? I don't really know, but it sounds interesting. We may look into it. And so with that, we're going to be moving on to the next question. But I thank you very much for bringing that up, and also I just saw someone say, this isn't fun, Enforcer, this is war. I think we kind of get that, but at the same time, we're not going to act doom and gloom because there's really no point. But anyways, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Andy Sunshine, who says, I used to say the best thing to come out of Alabama was I-20, but y'all took that title. Love from Atlanta. Or he meant to say Atlanta.
Well, I thank you so much for the kind remark there. Interstate 20 is pretty nice because, luckily enough, Interstate 20 allows you to not really stop in Alabama. I'm just kidding. Alabama's a nice place, but, well, it depends on where you go. But Anyways, I thank you so much for the kind comment. I'm glad that we were able to overtake Interstate 20 as the best thing to come out of Alabama, and hopefully we will be the best president. Well, hopefully I'll be the best president to come out of Alabama, because no president has ever been born and raised here in the state of Alabama. There's been a lot of them from Virginia and a couple from Georgia, but none from Alabama. I think even one came from Mississippi or Tennessee. I forgot which one. But Alabama doesn't have a single president to its name, which I kind of find sad. But with that, I thank you so much for the support and for the kind words as well. That was a really kind statement to say that we are your favorite more so than Interstate 20. And so with that, we are moving on to the next question. And thank you so much for the support.
And next up, we have a $5 super chat from Squamous Amos. And thank you very much for your support of the channel. We appreciate you very much. And moving on, we have a $5 super chat from Santiago Flores, who says, money for the fund that covers all the funds, the super fund.
And thank you so much for the people fund, the fun for people. If y'all have watched Seinfeld, I kind of botched that joke a little bit, but if y'all have seen Seinfeld, y'all know what I'm talking about. But I thank you so much for the support. I thank you for supporting the fund to end all funds. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. It helps this channel to keep on running, and without support from our viewers, this wouldn't be possible. And so with that, we're moving on to the next one, but thank you once again.
And up next, I want to give a shout out to Blue Dog Fine Art, Bruce Allison for putting in $3 donations, as well as Xeon for putting in a $1 donation. Thank you very much to all three of you for your support, and we appreciate you very much. And moving on, we have a $3 super chat from our Discord mod, Zach Jeffers, who says, no bots can take down the Enforcer.
And that's right, no bots can take down the Enforcer, and I have to say that if anything is going to take us down, is going to be my own exhaustion, which will never catch up with me because it hasn't yet, and it's 154 days in, and I'm still here, and the Russian bots aren't. So, ha ha ha. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, Zach Jefferson. If I can count on anyone, I can count on the Discord guard for helping to keep us running, especially behind the scenes. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again, Zach Jeffers, for being a Discord mod and also a longtime supporter of this channel.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Stephen Mintier, who says, Pizza Fund, keep up the good work that you do to shine a light on the war. Mainstream media sucks.
And thank you so much for your support, Stephen Mintier. And considering that you sent that in euros, which means you're from the European Union, or at least the European Economic Zone, I'm not really sure if that's even a thing that's existing anymore. I think most of the countries that are in the European Economic Zone are in the European Union now. But still, considering you're over there, and you're saying that mainstream news sucks even in Europe, that's really interesting to me. I actually thought the news quality would be better in Europe, but apparently not. When I went to Britain, I do have to say that when we went to Britain, we did watch the news over there, and I really liked how the news was presented over there a lot better. And I also liked the advertisement laws they had, because there wasn't a large amount of tacky, well, in fact, there was no billboards anywhere, which I found to be just wonderful. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I like driving around and seeing the countryside. I don't like seeing a massive, giant, ugly billboard advertising, you know, like just random stuff to me, like a McDonald's or something. But
I really liked on their news channel that guy that really grills the politicians and things over there.
Andrew Weir?
I remember his name. Andrew Neil, that's it. Andrew Neil. He just grills people like crazy, and you don't see that in America, but over there in Britain, apparently that's common. So yeah, that was really interesting to see.
Yeah, and he was the top guy, and I really do like his approach. I would have to say I have to give Andrew Neil a lot of respect. Out of anyone in the mainstream news, I don't give really any of them any respect, but I'll give Andrew Neil of the BBC a lot of respect, because he doesn't really pull any punches on anyone. It could be you know, it could be someone on the far left, the far right, the center, and anywhere in between, and he's going to give them a really hard time and just grill them. And I think that's a great way to do reporting, is that if you're going to be harsh on people, you got to be harsh on everyone. Or if you're going to be soft on people, you got to be soft on everyone. You can't kind of discern, you know, and have a bias of who you like and who you don't like and how you cover the news with that. And so I got to say, if anyone does deserve a little bit of credit, it would be Andrew Neil, from at least the interviews I saw him conduct on TV. But anyways, I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy the kind of light we shine on this war. We try and make sure it's more focused on the frontline actions itself, instead of the overarching shock lines and shock value and all that kind of stuff. And so I thank you so much for enjoying it, and we're going to try and keep this up the best we can. And I thank you so much for congratulating us with a pizza fund donation. And so with that, thank you once again, and we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $5 super chat from Kevin Scott 76, who says The Orville, a sci-fi show, has an absolute unstructured democracy where up or down votes determine everything in someone's life. Season 1, Episode 7. I'm not sure if that's a democracy, though, if they're determining what happens in everybody's life.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I thank you very much for the support. And now that comment's been brought up, I'll kind of bring about my reasons. And once again, this isn't getting into American politics. This is just getting into democratic structures and what I think would be conducive to, I guess you could say, a more fair. Well, not really a fair. It's not really exactly fair. It's more representative, more democratic society. Is the implementation of direct referendums on laws, or at least the ability to overturn laws via direct referendum. The Swiss have such a thing like that. I did go into it a little bit earlier. And that kind of stuff, I feel, starts to negate the importance of elected representatives. And I think that's something important to do. Because while it's always wonderful to be able to talk about, oh, you can vote for this guy, he stands for these points. Wouldn't it be better if you could just elect them in? And then if you disagree with whatever any of them are doing, you can shoot down the laws. And also I saw some people saying that's how dictators get in charge. And I don't see how. Because if for some reason a dictator did get in charge and that kind of direct referendum was in place and he started doing stuff like, well, we're going to pass a law where we suspend the rights of free speech, the public could just say, no, we don't like that. Have enough signatures on a referendum, it gets put up to a national referendum, and they shoot it down. And so by the tenets of this kind of direct referendum system where you can shoot down laws, you cannot create them, but you can shoot them down through a national referendum, you can largely keep things very representative of what the public wishes for, instead of having politicians, elected representatives doing that kind of work. And another thing that does, which a lot of people don't really talk about, and this is something that affects all sides, is this kind of removes the power of lobbying. And, that's something that everyone's always talking about is, the people don't really have a say in anything. It's always the lobbyists that have a say who are paying for these people's campaigns. That's true, because once they get elected, there's really no reason that they have to do what their constituents want. They can just do whatever they promise the lobbyists who help them to pay for their election and their election expenses to be able to get there. And through a direct referendum system where you can shoot down laws and stuff, you can focus more so on what those representatives stand for and what you would like for yourself, instead of kind of having that all put into a little bit of a guesswork. But that's just my opinion. That's kind of what I think. I honestly believe that if I was to become president, one of my main things would be trying to make the citizen more powerful than, say, an elected representative, at least in the final say on whether a law will become a law or not. I feel like if we actually believe in the idea of individuals having a direct say in the government, their say should have a lot of weight, more so than an elected representative who can represent their constituents or not, depending on whatever they fancy or how much they really care. So with that, we're going to be moving on to the next one. And thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does weigh in on it a little bit. But once again, that's just my opinion. And there's always downsides to everything. For example, if you allow these kinds of direct referendums, they could start to lead to a trend where nothing is done. Every single law that's proposed and is to be passed could be shot down, and then you could get stagnation, which is, of course, a side effect. Because it's not just, everything isn't sunshine and rainbows. It would be silly to say that it is. And just because I support this doesn't mean that I can't see the downsides of it. There would be downsides, but I, of course, see advantages that I believe kind of outweigh those downsides. But still, I still think it would be interesting to have a lot of input, see what y'all think about that as well. Because honestly, in this one instance, it's not really talking about American politics. It's more talking about the philosophy of what is a democracy and what should a democracy strive to do? Should it strive to actually have the weight of the citizens' opinions more so involved in how laws are actually passed, or should it remain more so on a representative system where the will of the citizenry can kind of be overturned based on what representative officials believe is best for the nation, and they may know what's better for the country. But still, You can go on and on. You can go on in either direction. You can go on in mine, you can go on in another, talking about in defense of a representative democracy, and there's a lot of things you can pull out of the woodworks to support either. Just like everything, there's no clear side to what's right or wrong. It's really just what you assume is right or wrong. But with that, we're going to move on to the next one. And I thank you once again for the support, and I thank you for letting me air that out a little bit more.
And next up, we have another $10 super chat from Will Riley, who says, Dick Cheney's good buddy, Charlton Heston, starred in Soylent Green, where they basically make the staple food for this dystopian world out of recycled people. Hence the comment about the dead Russians.
Oh, okay. Well, I thank you for explaining that, and I thank you very much for the support. And now that movie sounds kind of messed up. What do you think, Matthew? Because I think it's messed up.
This is sounding weird. And I'm curious because I know there is a drink called Soylent out there. I've seen it. Did they name the drink after the movie? Because surely that's not good for marketing.
Yeah, I don't know, but I do have to say, I thank you very much for the support and weighing in on that. And I also saw someone else saying that I should watch The Day After in Threads, and I've watched both of those, and I got to tell y'all, Threads does a lot better talking about a nuclear holocaust than any other film ever. It is absolutely terrifying and suspenseful throughout, and it doesn't even have a soundtrack, which tells you how good they did it. I loved the part where the special courts were instituted, because I felt like that was about the most true to life thing that would happen, is that in an emergency situation like that, after a nuclear onslaught has occurred, the special court would be convened where the military, specifically in Britain, because they do have that kind of ability, at least legally. In the United States, I'm sure that kind of special ability would be given because it's an emergency situation. But they would just take thieves and looters and they would start just executing them practically on the spot. And that was about one of the most realistic depictions of what a post-nuclear world would look like if, a nuclear exchange was to happen, is that the law would return back to a pretty brutal, punitive system, regardless whether that was the intention or not, because that would be the only way to try and upkeep some kind of order. And it's an unfortunate way of saying that, and of course it sounds a little aloof and somewhat draconian, but if a nuclear war was to happen, the central government would hardly have any control, so of course I guess you could say the justice system would revert more towards punishments suitable of the Middle Ages, because they would be more appropriate to the technology and the abilities of the government at that point. But with that, we're going to be moving on to the next one, and I thank you so much for the support, and I thank you for telling us what that reference was actually about. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Tim F., who says, what do you think about the Jeopard AA, and can it be effective for Ukraine?
Yes, I do think it can be effective for Ukraine, and the Gepard, I think it's Gepard, I'm not really sure if it's Jeopard or Gepard, but I've always called it a Gepard. The Gepard could be incredibly effective with taking on infantry due to the dual 30mm autocannons. It's much like a BMPT Terminator in that way, it's just missing the anti-tank missiles. And in another way that it could be incredibly effective is shooting down drones, because it seems to be somewhat economical in that kind of a situation. We've already seen the Ukrainians using Shilkas to shoot down drones, and so Gepards aren't that far away, at least in actual use, from being a Shilka. So I believe that they could be well used by the Ukrainians, and I think that they certainly have a place to fill on the battlefield. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer that question.
And up next, we have a $3 super chat from Jean-Marc Pagan Owl, who says, have you seen Sub Under Attack vid?
Have you seen Sub Under Attack vid?
Yes.
I don't think I have. If I'm understanding that question correctly, unfortunately, I have not. So in that instance, I'm going to have to plead ignorance, but I thank you very much for the support, and if we do find something that kind of meets that description, we'll make sure to put it on the stream and also mention that. And so thank you once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And for the final super chat of the night, we have a $3 donation from Anthony K. Smith, who says, Soylent Green. If I remember properly, when citizens passed away, they were processed into Soylent Green, which was fed back to the population.
Well, I think we already heard that one explained before, but still, that sounds pretty messed up in a way. But I thank you very much for the support and answering that and kind of giving us an idea of what that's about, because now that y'all said that, that sounds like a pretty weird movie. But maybe I'll check it out. Of course, I always eventually check out movies like that just because morbid curiosity takes over and you're like, what in the world is it really about? And then you watch and you're like, wow, that's messed up. Kind of like how I watched Threads. That was messed up all the way through. And I highly recommend y'all to watch that one. But with that, I hope that does address the comment. And I thank you so much for sharing that little additional bit of info about Soylent Green with us. And we're now going to move into the live chats. We're going to answer probably about 5 to 7 of them, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream. And so with that, what is the first question?
All right, and first up, we have a question from none other than Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, why do you think that Ukraine did not believe that Russia was going to invade? Was this a successful use of misinformation by the Russians?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Pakatang. It's a good one. And the reason why the Ukrainians well, actually, as far as I remember, the Ukrainians were actually saying up until the very start of the war, for about a month, that the Russians were serious and they were going to war. And that's also why there was a large amount of diplomatic talks going on before the lead up to the war, because the Ukrainians were trying to find some kind of solution where the Russians would leave them alone and not invade. Also, days before the invasion began, Zelenskyy declared a flag day to show the Ukrainian public's support for the actual government of Ukraine and the nation of Ukraine instead of the Russians. So it does seem like they knew about the war before it started. They just didn't know exactly when it would happen. But still, going off of the standpoint that they may have not known about the war, which is also an equally arguable point right now, considering we don't have enough information to know whether they did or didn't, rather than their official statements. The reason why they may have not been expecting the war is because, like me, everyone was assuming if the Russians go to war, that's going to be political, well, diplomatic and economic suicide. Usually, a lot of people like me sometimes mistake diplomatic for political, but politics is a domestic thing that pertains to the inside of a nation alone. And then foreign affairs, foreign relations, which falls under the category of diplomacy, occurs in between foreign nations. So whenever I say politics, I actually mean diplomacy. But it would be diplomatic and economic suicide for the Russians to do something like that. And that's why the Ukrainians may have not been expecting the war to actually begin, much like I wasn't either. It just seemed to be asinine, and yet the Russians still did it. And so with that, I hope that does answer your question, Pakatang. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Richie MC, who says, does the U.S. Navy have decommissioned ships that they can send to Ukraine?
I think we do. I think we're always in the process of decommissioning ships these days just because some of them have gotten so old. I do know that the Arleigh Burkes were supposed to be replaced by the littoral combat ship classes, but then those became a failure and we're already starting to retire some of them, like the Freedom class ships, which were just commissioned about a decade or more ago, which is like a newborn for a naval ship. But anyways, yes, there are ships we are retiring that we could send over. I think the Arleigh Burkes would be some of the best to send over, but at the same time, would that start to make the Russians freak out and get pissed off and go into a hissy fit over it? Because an Arleigh Burke really isn't anything to scoff at, and it pretty much can go toe-to-toe with anything that the Russian Navy can throw at it. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Maple Leaf Spring, who says, Enforcer, is wearing magazines on your chest more or less protection? I don't think I've seen anyone show an ammo magazine that saved them from small arms fire.
I can't really tell you that for certain. I feel like the plates protect the wearer more so than the magazines. I don't think the magazines or the bullets are dense enough to be able to stop a bullet. I think it would largely pass through, although it will lose a bit of its momentum. But then again, I'm not really a ballistics expert, so I'm not really sure if that's possible or not. I do know that in the Second World War, there was the occasional account from American soldiers that a bullet would get caught in an M block, which is the clip. It's not a clip, it's called an M block, but just to but for explanation purposes, that's the little clip that you shove into the top of the M1 Garand that has 8 rounds inside of it. That thing's called an M block. And I remember a couple of stories of those things saving some people. And so I think it'd be possible. We just haven't really heard about it. And, you know, then again, I may be wrong. I just don't know enough about that to answer that specifically. So with that, we're on to the next question. Sorry I couldn't answer that with certainty, but I hope I have helped out a little bit and kind of like giving at least my opinion on the answer. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Hoodoo, Texas, who says, why does there have to be so many evil countries? The UN sucks at its job. First is the name, United Nations. Should this be all nations because there is no unity?
Well, it's a good question, but sadly, the United Nations doesn't really have a lot of enforcing power, and no one's going to give the United Nations true enforcing power because at that point, every single nation on Earth will have lost its sovereignty, and the United Nations would be the sole government of the world. No one really wants to give that up, right, specifically right now, or most likely well into the future, because that means that all of the politicians who have worked their entire lives to get a portion of power within their respective countries will lose it within an instant. So I don't think that the United Nations will ever be able to do anything about all of these countries, because then again, if they were able to, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Poland, Ukraine, Russia, the United States, Canada, China, any nation you would like to name would have no authority anymore. It would be all up to the United Nations. So I hope that kind of addresses the comment. They're not bad at their jobs. It's just that there's really no way for them to do what a lot of people would wish they would do, which is kind of like enforce peace into the world, which is something that even if the United Nations was able to enforce it, it'd be impossible, because then the wars would shift from being from nation to nation, and it would be from an individual part of the world that would be fighting the United Nations. And so with that, I hope that does kind of answer the question in a way. I do understand the sentiments, but sadly, just due to how things are, it just wouldn't be possible for the United Nations to actually do anything about it. But with that, we're on to the next one. And I thank you so much, Hoodoo Texas, for being around for a long time and for supporting this channel. And with that, we're on to the second to last question of the night.
And next up, we have a question from Super Action General, who says, Enforcer, what do you make of the 40,000 dead orcs so far?
What I make of it is that that's literal failure. That's 40,000 soldiers killed that the Russians did not expect to die in this war, and they have not gotten anything out of it. They have not won the war. And when I say they haven't gotten anything out of it, yes, they've gotten some land. You can see it right here on the map, but that land means nothing right now. They have not won this war. The war is still ongoing, and they have 40,000 dead men, and they have nothing to show for it. And that tells me that this whole entire war has ended up meaning a hill of beans of difference for anyone, because the Russians have just lost 40,000 men, and nothing's really changed so far, rather than a front line. And it's hardly changed at that, and they've lost about half of it already. And so with that, I hope that answers the question, at least in a brief way. And we are now on to the final question of the night. And so who is the lucky last person to throw in that lucky last question?
The lucky last viewer of the night is Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, do you think this proxy war is the one and only opportunity in our lifetime to eliminate the Russian threat? Or do you believe that there will be more opportunities in the future?
Oh, there's always more opportunities. There's never just a single sole time. For example, I guess you could say during the Napoleonic Wars, that was the one time that the whole entire world or Napoleon could have crushed the Russians. And, he ended up failing. Then the British and the French and the Turks went into the Crimean War, and then they crushed the Russians in Crimea. After that, the Russians got crushed by the Japanese. Then they got crushed in World War I by the Germans. And then the Germans also facilitated the whole thing with the Reds and the Whites and, the Russian Civil War and all that. But still, they got crushed in World War I. They almost got crushed in World War II. It was close. It was really close. But they didn't really get crushed. There's always an opportunity to crush a country. We've seen the Germans get crushed multiple times. We've seen the Polish get crushed, golly, God knows how many times. We've seen the Ukrainians get rolled over by just about everyone in the continent. And so there's always a time where everyone will eventually be on the end of a steamroller. The Chinese, funnily enough, they usually steamroll themselves. Usually it sometimes has external influences involved, but if you look at the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1911, that was almost an entirely internal affair. And while, you can always argue that there was a lot of spheres of influence in the Qing dynasty, literally a college kid from Hong Kong just went into mainland China and was like, hey, this kind of sucks. And then literally the Qing dynasty just kind of collapsed. That's a very simplified explanation of it. But still, kind of gives a good picture. And then the Republic of China kind of collapsed on itself. It got steamrolled by the People's Republic of China, and that's why Taiwan exists now. The Japanese, you know, I mean, we're not going to go through the whole list. I could go on forever about how many times everyone in the world's gotten steamrolled or something like that. But still, there's always a time to crush a country, and there's multiple opportunities throughout the world. There's never like a window of opportunity where this is it and it'll never happen again. And so I would say this is not the only opportunity. If the world's entire goal was to just crush the Russians, there will eventually be another opportunity that arises. But it may be years or decades or centuries down the road. We just don't really know when. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least in my opinion, based off of what we've seen historically. There's never been a time where a country's been impervious to being crushed. A country in its own right is always vulnerable to foreign powers and can always be crushed. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have enjoyed tonight. We have, of course, been reporting the news, and I hope you all have had a fun time listening to the news, and I hope you all found something informational and interesting about it. If you have enjoyed the news, please make sure to hit the like button, and also subscribe if you're new to the channel, as these streams come out every single day of the week, except for Mondays, and they come out at 10 p.m. Eastern Time every single night, and they cover the past 24 hours of the war. And on Mondays, well, actually on Tuesdays, we cover the past 48 hours of the war. So we have constant war coverage of every single hour and what's been happening since. We also upload daily summaries, although those are most likely going to be reaching the wayside here soon. We're most likely going to make a couple more, maybe 3 or 4 more, and then those are going to come to a close. But still, I thank you all so much for enjoying, and of course, it has been a pleasure for me to report the news, and I'm highly honored that all of you all find us a reliable source of information on the war, and hopefully, as time goes on in the coming weeks, we'll also become a reliable provider of information on other topics around the world. Thank you all so much for watching once again, and I'll see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to report the day 155 news of the war. Take care, and have a great night.